My mother gave me an ultimatum at Christmas dinner in front of 33 relatives. Pay for your sister's $100,000 dream wedding, or you are dead to this family. My father stood up and declared that every person at the table agreed I owed her this money. They demanded I drain my life savings for a party while allowing her fiancé to mock my career. Now they are calling me 135 times a day, leaving dozens of sobbing voicemails begging for mercy. They have absolutely no idea that I hold the deed to the very house they just kicked me out of and the key to their complete financial ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who only valued you for what they could take from you. Pass the candied yams, Iman, and while you are at it, get your checkbook ready. Your sister's wedding is costing $100,000 and you are going to cover it. My mother, Brenda, did not even look up from her plate when she dropped the demand. She sliced her honey-baked ham with the absolute authority of a woman accustomed to blind obedience. The clinking of silverware against fine china instantly stopped. 33 relatives crammed into the expansive dining room of my parents' Atlanta suburban home held their collective breath. I kept my eyes on the crystal water goblet in front of me. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I just slowly and deliberately set down my silver fork. "I am sorry. What did you say?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, slicing through the heavy cinnamon-scented air of the room. Across the mahogany table, my 28-year-old sister Sierra adjusted the neckline of her emerald silk blouse. She flashed a perfectly manicured hand, ensuring the bright light of the chandelier hit her 3-carat diamond engagement ring just right. Sitting next to her was Preston, her tall, blonde, blue-eyed fiancé in a bespoke tailored suit. He offered me a tight, patronizing smile, the kind of smile you give to a stray animal that wandered a little too close to the country club patio. "Do not make me repeat myself in front of company, Iman," my mother snapped, finally lifting her gaze. Her eyes were hard and unyielding, daring me to challenge her in front of the congregation members she had invited. "Sierra is marrying into the Covington family. Preston's people expect a certain standard. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom, a 5-course plated dinner, a live 12-piece band. The deposit is due by New Year's. Your father and I decided that since you do not have a family of your own to support, it is your duty to step up." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There was none. "My duty," I repeated, looking around the table. Uncle Vernon was suddenly very fascinated by his mashed potatoes. My cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances, shifting in their seats, but nobody said a word. In a black family led by a strong matriarch like Brenda, you do not interrupt the sermon, you just bow your head and survive. "Yes, your duty, my father," Calvin boomed from the head of the table. He stood up, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the turkey centerpiece. "You have been living in that cramped, cheap apartment downtown for 5 years. You hoard whatever little money you scrape together from that customer service job of yours. Sierra is making moves. She is elevating this family's status. The least you can do is support her." "I am a financial consultant, Dad," I corrected him quietly, though I knew it was a losing battle. "Not a customer service representative." "Whatever it is you do on that computer all day," my mother waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a pest. "The point is, you have no husband, you have no children, you have 0 real expenses. Sierra deserves her dream wedding. Preston's family is flying in from Connecticut, and we will not look like we are struggling to host them properly." Preston chuckled. It was a soft, arrogant sound that made the blood roar in my ears. "Now, Brenda," Calvin Preston said, holding up his hands in a gesture of fake humility, "we do not want to force Iman. If she cannot afford it on her little data entry salary, my parents can always pitch in. I mean, we would hate for it to be a financial burden on her. We know things are tight for her demographic." The microaggression hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Her little data entry salary. Her demographic. He was playing my parents perfectly. Preston knew exactly how much my parents hated looking poor, especially in front of a wealthy white man they viewed as their golden ticket to high society. My mother's face turned an angry shade of red. She slapped her hand flat against the table, making the glasses rattle. Absolutely not, Preston. The bride's family pays for the wedding. That is tradition, and Iman will pay it. She turned her glaring eyes back to me, pointing a manicured finger at my face. $50,000 wired to my account by Monday morning, the other $50,000 by the end of January. I looked at Sierra, my beautiful spoiled sister who had never worked a day past 5 in the afternoon in her entire life. Sierra, you are a real estate agent, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. Preston, you claim to be a Wall Street crypto investor. Why exactly do you need my money? Because all our capital is tied up in high-yield assets right now, Iman Preston said smoothly, not missing a beat. It is basic corporate economics. You would not understand how liquidity works at this level. What I understand? I said, finally standing up, pushing my heavy oak chair back with a loud screech against the hardwood floor, is that you are two grown adults demanding I empty my life savings for a party. Sit down, Iman, my father roared. The veins in his neck bulged visibly. Every person at this table agrees you owe her this. Do you remember when you were struggling in college and we let you sleep on the couch? This family protects its own. You will write that check, or so help me God, I will make sure you regret it. Or what, Dad? I challenged. My voice never rose above a conversational volume. That was what always unnerved them. I never gave them the loud, dramatic reaction they constantly tried to provoke. You charged me rent for that couch while you bought Sierra a brand new car. So what exactly is the threat here? Or you are dead to this family. My mother delivered the ultimatum with pure ice in her veins. You either contribute to your sister's future, or you walk out that door and never come back to Sunday dinner. You will not be invited to the wedding. You will not be part of this family. Choose. The silence returned heavier this time. 33 pairs of eyes burned into my skin. They expected me to cave. They expected me to cry, to apologize, to promise to take out a personal loan just to buy my way back into their conditional love. That was the dynamic we had always played out. I was the scapegoat, the automated teller machine they kicked whenever they needed cash, but hid in the kitchen when important company came over. I looked at my mother's furious face. I looked at my father's puffed-out chest. I looked at Sierra's smug smile and finally at Preston's condescending blue eyes. What Preston did not know, what none of them knew, was that my little data entry job was actually my own financial technology company. And just 3 days ago, my firm had acquired a massive portfolio of defaulted subprime loans from a major national bank. As I looked at Preston, I remembered a very specific, highly classified document I had reviewed on my encrypted server just that morning. A document with Preston's full legal name, his plunging credit score, and a $250,000 defaulted loan tied to a shell company. He was not a Wall Street genius. He was a fraud drowning in debt, desperately looking for a bailout. And my parents were his mark. I reached for my wool coat draped over the back of my chair. Keep the candied yams, I said, slipping my arms into the sleeves. And keep your wedding, Iman. My mother screamed, her voice cracking as I turned my back and walked toward the front door. If you walk out that door, do not you ever call me again. Do not worry, Brenda, I said, pulling the heavy front door open. The freezing winter wind rushed into the stifling house. I will not have to. You will be the one calling me. I walked out into the crisp December air, the heavy door slamming shut behind me. By the time I started my car engine, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sierra telling me I was a selfish, jealous hater, and that they did not need my broke self anyway. I put the car in drive and smiled in the dark. They had absolutely no idea. The real game had not even started yet, and I already held checkmate. The heater in my car hummed quietly, fighting against the bitter December chill that seeped through the windows. I steered my sedan out of my parents' pristine suburban neighborhood, leaving the sprawling manicured lawns and holiday lights behind. For the first 5 minutes of the drive, the silence inside the cabin was absolute and deeply comforting. Then my phone connected to the Bluetooth system and the digital onslaught began. It started with a single sharp chime, then another, then a continuous, relentless barrage of notifications that made the dashboard screen flash like a warning beacon. Missed call from Mom, missed call from Dad, missed call from Sierra. The counter on my screen ticked upward with terrifying speed. 10 missed calls. 30. 75. By the time I merged onto the highway heading back toward downtown Atlanta, the number had climbed to an astonishing 135. They were panicking. For 32 years, my role in the family had been the quiet, obedient shock absorber. I was the one who took the insults, smiled through the blatant disrespect, and opened my wallet whenever the golden child needed a bailout. Walking out that door was not just an act of defiance. It was a disruption of the fundamental natural order they had built their lives upon. The missed calls soon gave way to voicemails. I tapped the screen to play them, letting their voices fill the quiet space of my car. I did not do this to torture myself. I did it because I needed to hear exactly who they were one last time before I burned their fragile financial world to the ground. The first message was from my mother. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with a rage that bordered on hysterical. "Iman, you turn your car around right this second. How dare you humiliate me in front of Preston and his family? You are a selfish, ungrateful girl. You think you can just walk away from your obligations. If you do not wire that money by Monday, you will never step foot in this house again." The second message played immediately after. It was my father, his tone heavy with the patriarchal authority he used to bully everyone into submission. "You have deeply disappointed me tonight, Iman. Your sister is finally securing a real future for this family, and you throw a childish tantrum over money. Money you have absolutely no use for. Call your mother and apologize immediately." I kept my eyes on this road, my grip relaxed on the steering wheel. Their words washed over me, but they no longer had the power to sink their claws into my chest. I had spent a lifetime bleeding myself dry to earn a single drop of their approval. The third voicemail was from Aunt Denise, my mother's older sister and the family chief gossip. Her message was exactly what I expected, a masterclass in gaslighting and revisionist history. "Iman, I am sitting here holding your mother while she cries. You should be ashamed of yourself. So what if you helped Sierra out a little bit in the past? You think working those 3 jobs in college gives you the right to ruin her wedding? You think paying her tuition makes you better than us? That is what family does. We sacrifice. You owe your parents everything, and paying for this wedding is the least you can do to repay them for raising you." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. A little bit. Working 3 jobs in college. The memories flashed behind my eyes, vivid and exhausting. While Sierra was attending sorority formals and taking weekend trips to Miami, I was pulling overnight shifts at a diner, entering data at a logistics firm during the day, and tutoring freshmen on weekends. Every cent I made beyond my own meager rent went directly to Sierra out-of-state university tuition, because my parents had maxed out their credit cards, trying to maintain the illusion of wealth. They had told me it was an investment in the family. They promised that once Sierra graduated and got a high-paying job, she would pay me back and take care of us all. Instead, she became a part-time real estate agent who sold perhaps 2 houses a year and spent her days shopping for designer bags to impress men like Preston. I had sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my peace of mind to hand my sister a debt-free life. And my reward was being treated like the hired help asked to sit quietly in the corner until it was time to foot the next bill. The voicemails continued, playing one after another, a chorus of manipulation and entitlement. Cousins telling me I was being cheap, uncles demanding I respect my father. It was a coordinated attack designed to break my spirit and force me back into compliance. They relied on my guilt. They banked on the idea that my fear of being ostracized would outweigh my sense of self-preservation. Then came a message from Sierra. The background noise sounded like she was locked in a bathroom away from the party. She was sobbing, performing the role of the victim with Oscar-worthy precision. "Iman, you are ruining my life. Preston family already thinks we are not good enough for them. If we lose the Ritz-Carlton deposit, they will cancel the engagement. I know they will. Why do you always have to make everything about you? Just give me the money. You do not even have a boyfriend to spend it on. Please do not be such a jealous loser and just fix this." I reached over and muted the audio. The sheer audacity of her tears, the absolute lack of self-awareness was staggering. She truly believed her vanity project was more important than my entire livelihood. She believed I existed solely to be an instrument of her convenience. As I navigated the familiar city streets, pulling into the modest neighborhood where I kept my decoy apartment, I felt a profound sense of closure. For years, I had harbored a tiny, foolish hope that they might one day see my value, that they might look at my hard work, my independence, and finally offer the love they gave Sierra so freely. Tonight, that hope finally died, and in its place, a cold, calculated clarity took root. I parked my car in the assigned space of the aging apartment complex. This was the place I pretended to live, a visual lie I maintained, to keep my family from knowing about my luxury condo across town and the multi-million-dollar company I had built from the ground up. Keeping them in the dark had been a protective measure. Now it was my greatest strategic advantage. I turned off the ignition and the car plunged into darkness. I picked up my phone to clear the notifications. There were now 44 voicemails waiting in my inbox, an entire audio library of emotional abuse. I did not delete them. I would keep them as a reminder whenever I felt tempted to show mercy. Just as I was about to step out of the car, the screen lit up with a new text message. Not from my parents, not from my sister. It was from Preston. I opened the message, reading the words carefully. It was a demand wrapped in condescension, a fatal miscalculation, by a man who thought he held all the power. I locked my car doors and leaned back against the seat, preparing to respond to the man whose financial life I quite literally owned. The screen of my phone illuminated the dark cabin of my car, casting a pale blue light across my face. The text message from Preston was a masterpiece of condescension and thinly veiled racism. He typed exactly the way he spoke, with an arrogant rhythm that assumed he was the smartest person in any room. "Listen to me very carefully, Iman," he wrote. "You are embarrassing your parents, and you are severely stressing out my future wife. I know people from your background have a hard time understanding the pressures of high society, but this wedding is a crucial networking event for my family. We cannot have you ruining it because you are too cheap or too broke to contribute. Go to a bank tomorrow morning. Take out a personal loan if you have to. Ask for an advance on your little data entry salary. I do not care how you get the funds, but you need to wire that $50,000 to your mother by Monday. Do not make me step in and handle this for them." I sat in the cold car and read the message 3 times. He actually believed he was intimidating me. He believed his tailored suits and his blonde hair gave him absolute authority over my life and my finances. He thought I was a helpless administrative worker, terrified of his imagined Wall Street connections. I did not reply with anger. I did not justify my career or defend my bank account. I simply typed a 2-word response. Message received. I stepped out of my car and locked the doors. The apartment building in front of me was a relic from the 1980s. The brick exterior was stained with age, and the exterior hallway lights flickered constantly. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my unit, listening to the sounds of my neighbors' televisions through the thin walls. I unlocked my door and stepped inside the tiny 1-bedroom apartment. The furniture was cheap and mismatched. The radiator hissed loudly in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the winter draft. My parents hated this apartment. Sierra refused to even use the bathroom when she visited, claiming the entire building smelled like poverty. They had no idea that this apartment was nothing more than a carefully constructed stage set. I paid the minimal rent in cash every month, specifically to maintain the illusion that I was exactly what they thought I was: the struggling middle child, the financial underachiever, the girl who never quite measured up to her glamorous older sister. I walked past the worn sofa and headed straight for the small closet in the bedroom. I pushed aside a row of cheap winter coats and knelt on the scuffed carpet. My fingers traced the outline of a loose floorboard. I lifted the wood panel to reveal a heavy, fireproof biometric safe. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside sat the only object of real value in the entire apartment: a sleek, matte black encrypted laptop. I carried the laptop to the small kitchen table and powered it on. This was my actual life. This was the empire I had built entirely in the shadows, while my family was busy mocking my wardrobe and demanding my paycheck. The screen demanded a series of complex passphrases and secondary authentication codes. I bypassed the security protocols and logged directly into the central server of my company. I was not a customer service representative. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Solutions. We were a specialized financial technology firm that operated quietly but aggressively in the secondary debt market. My company purchased massive portfolios of distressed and defaulted debt from major national banks for pennies on the dollar. We bought toxic mortgages, abandoned credit card accounts, and defaulted business loans. We owned the financial failures of thousands of desperate people. Just 3 days ago, my firm had closed our largest acquisition to date. We had purchased a massive bundle of high-risk, subprime commercial loans from the exact bank Preston claimed to use for his elite cryptocurrency investments. I opened the newly acquired database and accessed the master ledger. The interface was a stream of raw financial data scrolling across the screen in endless columns. I typed Preston Covington into the primary search bar and waited. The system pulled his complete financial history in a matter of seconds. I leaned closer to the screen, letting the cold, hard facts wash away the last remnants of family insults. Preston was not a wealthy investment banker. He was not a cryptocurrency genius managing millions in high-yield assets. He was a spectacular financial disaster hiding behind a carefully maintained aesthetic. His primary limited liability company was completely hollow. It was an empty shell registered to a virtual office address. According to the internal banknotes, Preston had defaulted on 3 separate commercial loans over the past 2 years. His personal credit cards were entirely maxed out. He was currently using high-interest cash advances from one credit card to make the minimum payments on another. I clicked into the detailed transaction history. The bespoke suits he wore to family dinners were purchased on credit. The luxury German sedan he drove was leased, and the leasing company had already issued 2 formal warnings for missed payments. He was quite literally driving a car that was weeks away from being repossessed. The bank had flagged his entire profile as extremely high risk. They considered his debt so toxic and unrecoverable that they bundled his accounts into the massive portfolio they sold to my company. Preston did not know it yet, but Apex Financial Solutions now owned every single debt he possessed. I was legally his primary creditor. I dug deeper into the files, trying to understand the exact nature of his desperation. Why was he demanding $100,000 for a wedding venue? The answer was waiting in a separate folder marked Pending Litigation. Preston owed exactly $98,000 to an aggressive private lending firm. The notes indicated that this firm was preparing to file a massive fraud lawsuit against him for securing a previous loan using fabricated asset statements. He needed the wedding money to pay off the private lender and keep himself out of a federal courtroom. He was using Sierra and my parents to fund his legal survival. He targeted my family because he saw how desperate my parents were for validation. He recognized that Brenda and Calvin would bankrupt themselves just to associate with a white man who looked like old money. He knew they would happily sacrifice their youngest daughter to protect the illusion of high society success. I sat back in the hard wooden kitchen chair and stared at the glowing screen. The sheer scale of his deception was breathtaking. He was planning to bleed my parents dry to save his own skin, and they were eagerly handing him the knife. My phone suddenly vibrated on the table, shattering the quiet hum of the radiator. The screen lit up with a notification from the family location sharing application. I had been forced to install it years ago under the guise of family safety. A text message from Sierra flashed across the display. She told me she was not going to let me ruin her life. She said she was 10 minutes away from my building and she was not leaving until I showed her my bank account balances to prove I was broke. I heard the distant sound of tires screeching onto my street. Sierra was coming to physically force me into submission, just like they always did. I calmly closed my encrypted laptop and locked it back inside the hidden floor safe. I stood up and smoothed the front of my shirt, preparing to welcome my sister into the trap she was so eager to spring. The heavy wooden door of my apartment shuddered under the force of a frantic pounding. It was not a polite knock. It was the rhythmic, demanding strike of someone who believed they owned whatever space they were trying to enter. I walked slowly from the kitchen, running my hand along the chipped laminate countertop I specifically chose for this unit. The pounding grew louder, echoing down the shabby hallway of the building. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Sierra shoved past me before I could even say a word. The freezing winter wind followed her in smelling of expensive jasmine perfume and exhaust fumes. She was still wearing the emerald silk blouse from dinner, her 3-carat ring catching the dim yellow light of my entryway. Her face was flushed with rage and her chest heaved as she spun around to face me. "Are you out of your mind?" Sierra screamed, her voice bouncing off the thin apartment walls. "How dare you walk out on us like that? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to explain your little tantrum to Preston?" I closed the door quietly, leaning against it. I had a headache earlier. I lied, my voice flat and completely devoid of the emotion she was desperate to elicit. I needed to go home. "This is not a home, Iman." Sierra threw her arms out, gesturing wildly at the cramped living room. "This is a dump. It smells like cheap soup and failure. And you are trying to drag me down here with you." Preston is furious. "Mom is literally having heart palpitations. You are destroying my wedding over a measly $100,000. I crossed my arms and watched her. She paced the small expanse of the worn carpet, her designer heels sinking into the cheap fibers. She was practically vibrating with a frantic, panicked energy. It was the energy of someone who knew they were standing on a house of cards. "It is my entire life savings, Sierra," I said, feeding her the narrative she expected to hear. "I cannot just hand it over because you want to impress the Covingtons." "They are not just the Covingtons, Iman." Sierra stopped pacing and glared at me. "They are Connecticut royalty. Preston's father plays golf with senators. His mother sits on the board of 3 different museums. Do you know what it took for them to accept me? Do you know how hard Mom and Dad worked to make sure we looked like we belong in their world? You are embarrassing us. You always embarrass us." She stepped closer, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "We need that money to pay the Ritz-Carlton by Monday. If we miss the deposit deadline, Preston's mother will find out. She will tell his father and they will think we are just some broke suburban family trying to climb the social ladder. They will make him cancel the wedding. I am not losing this marriage because my sister wants to be stingy with her little customer service checks." She was unraveling. The entitlement was so deeply ingrained in her that she could not even hear the absurdity of her own words. She was openly admitting that this entire wedding was a fraudulent performance designed to trick a wealthy white family into accepting her. What she did not know was that the wealthy white family was just as fraudulent as ours. I took a step forward, maintaining my quiet demeanor. "I do not have $100,000 just sitting in a checking account, Sierra." "Then figure it out," she shrieked. Her arm swung out, catching a cheap ceramic vase I had bought from a thrift store for $2. It flew off the side table and shattered against the linoleum floor of the kitchen. She did not even look down at the broken pieces. "Take out a loan. Max out your credit cards. Ask your boss for an advance. I do not care what you have to do. You owe me this. You owe this family. We let you sleep on our couch when you had nothing." I looked down at the shattered ceramic near my boots. It was a perfect metaphor for her entire existence, loud, destructive, and ultimately cheap. I let out a slow, trembling breath, forcing my shoulders to slump. I arranged my facial features into an expression of defeated exhaustion, playing the role of the broken older sister who had finally run out of fight. "Fine," I whispered, keeping my eyes on the floor. "Fine, Sierra. I will figure it out." She stopped her manic pacing. The anger on her face instantly shifted into a triumphant, smug smile. She actually believed she had intimidated me. She believed her little temper tantrum had broken my resolve just like my parents' tantrums always did. "Good," she said, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. "I am glad you finally found some common sense. Preston told Mom you would eventually cave once you realized what was at stake." I swallowed the bitter laugh that threatened to escape my throat. "I will give you the money." I continued, my voice carefully hesitant. "But I am not just wiring it blindly to an account. It is everything I have." If I am going to empty my savings and go into debt for this, I want it done properly. What does that mean? Sierra snapped her eyes, narrowing with suspicion. It means I want to sit down with you, Preston and Mom and Dad. I want us to meet at a nice restaurant. I will bring the bank drafts, but we are going to sign a formal gift agreement. Just a simple contract stating that this money is strictly for the wedding vendors. I need to protect myself, Sierra. I need it in writing so nobody comes asking me for more later. Sierra rolled her eyes, groaning loudly. You are so dramatic, Iman. A contract. We are family. Why do you have to make everything into some weird legal issue? Because it is my money, I said softly, looking up to meet her gaze. And if you want it, you will do this my way. Tomorrow night. The Capitol Grill downtown. 7 o'clock. You bring Preston and his venue documents. I will bring the funds. If you cannot do that, then you can pay the Ritz-Carlton yourselves. She stared at me, weighing her options. She hated the idea of me having any terms at all, but she was desperate. She needed the cash to keep up her charade, and she thought she was dealing with a naive data entry worker who just wanted to play businesswoman. Fine, she huffed, grabbing her designer purse from the counter. Tomorrow at 7. Capitol Grill. Do not be late and dress nicely for once. Preston hates when people look sloppy in public. She turned on her heel and marched out of the apartment, her shoes crunching over the broken pieces of ceramic she had destroyed. She did not look back. She did not say thank you. She just slammed the heavy wooden door shut, leaving me alone in the quiet hallway. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading down the stairs. The cold draft from the window rattled the cheap blinds. I looked at the mess on the floor, and then I began to smile. It started as a small smirk and slowly grew into a genuine, relaxed grin. She had taken the bait without a single second of hesitation. They were all going to walk right into the restaurant tomorrow night, expecting to bully a defeated woman into handing over her meager life savings. They expected to humiliate me, take my money, and banish me back to the shadows while they lived out their high society fantasies. I walked back into my bedroom and knelt by the closet. I moved the coats aside, lifted the floorboard, and pressed my thumb to the scanner of the heavy steel safe. I pulled out the sleek encrypted laptop and carried it back to the kitchen table. I had a lot of work to do before tomorrow night. I needed to print out Preston Covington's disastrous credit report. I needed to print the foreclosure notices on his fake shell company. And most importantly, I needed to review the exact terms of the subprime loan my parents had secretly taken out against their house to fund his non-existent crypto investments. I opened a blank document and began drafting the formal gift agreement I had promised Sierra. I typed out the legal jargon with precision, adding specific clauses that would legally bind Preston to his own lies. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to give them a formal meeting, a stack of paperwork, and the absolute undisputable truth. They wanted to play corporate economics. Tomorrow night, I was going to show them exactly how liquidity works at my level. The heavy mahogany doors of the Capitol Grill opened to a wave of quiet jazz and the smell of expensive seared steaks. I wore a tailored black suit that cost more than Sierra's entire wedding dress budget, but it lacked any flashy designer logos, so my family would assume I bought it on clearance. I spotted them immediately. They had secured a large leather booth in the back corner of the dimly lit dining room. My father Calvin was swirling a glass of red wine, holding it by the bowl instead of the stem, giving away his lack of actual refinement. My mother Brenda was practically leaning over the table, hanging onto every word leaving Preston's mouth. Sierra sat next to him, clutching her designer purse like a shield. I walked over quietly and slid into the empty seat across from Preston. Nobody greeted me. Nobody asked about my day. My father just tapped his heavy watch and noted that I was 2 minutes late. Let us get straight to business, Preston said, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the white linen tablecloth. He wore a navy pinstripe suit and a smile that reeked of unearned confidence. Sierra tells me you finally decided to step up and fulfill your familial obligations, Iman. I am glad you found a way to secure the capital. I know scraping together $100,000 must have been stressful on your salary, but this is how we build generational wealth. We support each other. I looked at his smooth, arrogant face. I thought about the $98,000 fraud lawsuit hanging over his head and the defaulted credit cards I now legally owned. I brought the funds, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. But as I told Sierra yesterday, I am not handing over my life savings blindly. I want to see the vendor contracts. I want to see the invoice from the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Sierra let out a loud, exasperated sigh and rolled her eyes at our mother. Mom, tell her to stop being so difficult, she whined. Iman, stop playing corporate lawyer, Brenda snapped, setting her wine glass down with a heavy thud. You are embarrassing us. Preston is a very busy man, and he took time out of his evening to handle this transaction for you. Just give them the money so we can enjoy our dinner. Preston held up a manicured hand, stopping my mother with a patronizing, gentle smile. It is all right, Brenda, he said smoothly. Iman is just being cautious. It is adorable, really. People who have never handled large sums of liquidity are often nervous about wire transfers. I anticipated this. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He slid it across the polished wood table until it stopped right in front of me. There is your contract, Iman, he said, leaning back against the leather booth. Everything is legally binding, just like you asked. I opened the folder. The thick ivory paper inside had a heavy professional weight to it, but a single glance at the header told me everything I needed to know. It was not a contract with a hotel catering manager. It was not a deposit agreement for a wedding planner or a florist. It was a direct wire transfer authorization form. I kept my face entirely blank as I read the destination details. The receiving account did not belong to a vendor. It belonged to an entity called Apex Crypto Ventures Limited Liability Company. It was the exact same fraudulent shell company I had investigated on my encrypted corporate server just 12 hours ago. What is this? I asked, looking up from the fraudulent document. This is not a wedding contract, Preston. This is a wire transfer to a private investment fund. Preston chuckled, that same soft, arrogant sound that always made my father nod in blind agreement. It is basic financial structuring, Iman. You see, the Ritz-Carlton requires a certified cashier's check for the final deposit. Instead of you writing a direct check and taking the tax hit, I am going to route your $50,000 through my high-yield crypto fund. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, as if he were sharing a brilliant Wall Street secret. By routing it through my limited liability company, we create a corporate tax shield. My fund will hold the capital for 3 days, generate a quick 8% yield on the blockchain, and then my firm will issue the final payment to the hotel. It protects you from gift taxes, and it makes the money work for us before we spend it. It is what we call a strategic capital maneuver. My father pounded his fist on the table in pure admiration. Now that is brilliant! Calvin boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet restaurant. That is exactly why we need a mind like yours in this family, Preston, making the money work for us. Iman, you need to pay attention. You might actually learn something about real finance today. I stared at my father, marveling at how easily he was being conned. He was so desperate to feel wealthy that he was applauding a man who was actively attempting to steal his daughter's life savings. So let me make sure I understand this, I said, my eyes locking onto Preston's pale blue gaze. You want me to wire $50,000 directly into your personal crypto investment account, an account that you control completely, and you promise that you will eventually pay the hotel with it. It is not a personal account, it is a corporate holding fund. Preston corrected, his tone sharpening with irritation. And yes, that is exactly how it works. You sign the wire authorization today, and I handle the complex logistics tomorrow. And what happens if the crypto market crashes tomorrow? I asked, tilting my head slightly. What happens if this limited liability company has outstanding debts and the incoming funds are automatically frozen by a creditor? Preston flinched. It was a micro-expression, a tiny tightening of his jaw, and a sudden narrowing of his eyes. I had hit the exact nerve I was aiming for. He knew his accounts were flagged. He knew aggressive private lenders were actively hunting for his assets. If I wired money into that account, it would be instantly seized to pay off his $98,000 fraud debt. There would never be a wedding deposit. Do not be ridiculous, Iman Sierra snapped, slamming her hand on the table. Preston's company is incredibly successful. He manages millions of dollars. You are just trying to find an excuse to back out because you are a selfish hater. Sierra is right, Brenda sneered, glaring at me with absolute contempt. You are insulting your future brother-in-law. He is offering to do you a favor by shielding you from taxes, and you sit there interrogating him like some lowly bank teller. Sign the paper, Iman. I am losing my patience. I looked down at the wire transfer form again. The sheer audacity of the document was almost beautiful. He was incredibly smooth. If I had been the naive data entry worker my family believed me to be, I probably would have signed it just to escape the relentless pressure of their combined hostility. But I was not a data entry worker. I was the chief executive officer of the debt acquisition firm that currently held every single financial mistake Preston Covington had ever made. I do not think I will be signing this, Preston, I said, pushing the manila folder back across the table. The atmosphere at the table instantly turned toxic. My father's face flushed deep purple, and Sierra let out a loud, dramatic gasp of outrage. "Listen to me, you little nobody!" Preston hissed, dropping the polite facade entirely. His voice was a low, menacing growl. "I am giving you a chance to be part of something bigger than your pathetic little apartment and your dead-end job. You are going to sign that paper right now, or I swear to God I will have Sierra cut this entire side of the family off forever." "Oh, I brought something to sign," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that sliced through the tension like a razor. I reached down and picked up my heavy leather briefcase from the floor. I placed it squarely on the table, pushing aside the fine silverware and crystal water glasses. I popped the brass locks and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound in a heavy blue corporate folder. "I did not bring a wire transfer, Preston," I said, sliding the massive stack of papers directly in front of him. "I brought a formal debt consolidation agreement from Apex Financial Solutions." Preston looked down at the blue folder. The moment he read the name of my company, the color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a tailored suit. Preston stared at the embossed silver letters on the heavy blue cardstock. His breathing stopped completely. The arrogant smirk that had been permanently plastered across his face melted away, leaving behind the terrified expression of a man who realized he had just walked onto a landmine. He reached out with a trembling hand and tried to slide the folder back toward me. "What is this?" Preston stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher than it had been a moment ago. "Where did you get this?" "I got it from my office," I said, leaning back against the plush leather booth and crossing my arms. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Financial Solutions. We finalized the acquisition of your defaulted loan portfolio 3 days ago, which makes me your primary creditor." Sierra let out a loud, exasperated sigh, completely oblivious to the sheer panic radiating from her fiancé. "Iman, stop playing these stupid games," she whined, shifting her designer purse on her lap. "You do not own a financial firm. You do data entry in a cubicle downtown. Stop embarrassing us and just sign Preston's wire transfer so we can order our steaks." I kept my eyes locked on Preston, watching the cold sweat begin to bead on his forehead. I asked him to explain his crypto investment firm to me again. I asked him why a Wall Street genius needed to route my $50,000 through a shell company registered to a virtual office above a strip mall. My father slammed his heavy hand down on the table, making the fine silverware jump and clatter against the porcelain plates. "That is exactly enough out of you, Iman," Calvin roared. His face was twisted into an ugly mask of rage, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff collar. "How dare you interrogate this man about his business structure? You know absolutely nothing about high finance or corporate asset management. You sit at a computer all day typing numbers for a boss who probably barely knows your name. Preston is offering to do you a massive favor by shielding your little savings from taxes," my mother Brenda chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "And you repay his kindness by printing out fake legal documents to make yourself look important. You are making a fool of yourself in front of polite company." I looked at my parents, the people who were supposed to protect and guide me. They were furiously defending a desperate con artist simply because he wore a bespoke suit and possessed the right demographic profile for their country club fantasies. They were so desperate to elevate their own social status that they were willing to verbally destroy their youngest daughter in the middle of a crowded upscale restaurant. "Dad, he is lying to you," I said, keeping my tone perfectly calm despite the adrenaline rushing through my veins. "He does not have millions in crypto assets. He is $98,000 in debt to a private lending firm that is currently preparing to sue him for fraud. He is trying to steal my life savings to pay them off before he ends up in a federal courtroom." Sierra let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed over the soft jazz playing in the dining room. "You are so pathetic, Iman. You are actually making up lies about Preston because you cannot stand the fact that I am marrying into a wealthy family." Brenda reached over and patted Sierra's hand, offering her comfort against my supposed cruelty. "Do not listen to her, sweetie," my mother said, glaring at me with eyes full of pure contempt. "She has always been incredibly jealous of you. Ever since you were little girls, she could never handle it when you got the attention. Now you are marrying into the Covington family and moving into high society, and she is stuck in that depressing little apartment with no prospects and absolutely no future." "It is honestly just sad," Preston said, his voice trembling slightly as he desperately tried to regain his footing. He saw my parents' blind, unwavering loyalty and decided to use it as a shield. He puffed out his chest and offered me a look of fake pity, trying to re-establish his dominance. "I understand that my world is intimidating to you, Iman. Corporate finance is very complex for a layman. You probably found some public records online and completely misunderstood the terminology. Those debts belong to a different corporate entity entirely." "He is so forgiving," Sierra swooned, looking at Preston as if he were a saint descended from heaven. "Any other man would have walked out of this restaurant after being insulted like this by his future sister-in-law." My father pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at my face. "You are going to sign his wire transfer document right now, Iman. You are going to sign it, and then you are going to apologize to Preston for questioning his integrity. If you refuse, you are no longer a part of this family. I will not have a jealous, bitter woman ruining my eldest daughter's future because she cannot find a husband of her own." I sat in the dim light of the restaurant and let their orchestrated gaslighting wash over me. For my entire life, this exact tactic had worked flawlessly. Whenever I tried to assert myself or point out a truth they did not want to hear, they would close ranks and unite against me. They would twist reality, insult my intelligence, and accuse me of being jealous until I finally broke down and apologized just to keep the peace. But the frightened girl they used to bully did not exist anymore. I looked at the three people who shared my blood and the fraudster they worshipped blindly. They truly thought my blue folder was just a prop. They thought I was bluffing to save my bruised ego. I reached across the white linen tablecloth and flipped open the heavy blue cover of the Apex Financial Solutions dossier. The first page was a highly detailed executive summary of Preston's defaulted subprime loans, complete with his social security number, his personal signature, and the exact staggering amount of his negative net worth. I tapped the heavy paper with my index finger, maintaining steady eye contact with my father. "I am not jealous, Sierra," I said quietly. "And I am not confused about the financial terminology, Preston. You are completely broke, and in exactly 72 hours, my legal team is going to initiate foreclosure proceedings on every single asset you pretend to own." Preston stared at the open folder, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The crushing reality of his situation was finally crashing down around him. He could not charm his way out of this room. He could not use my parents as a shield against a corporate debt acquisition strategy he could not even comprehend. But my father, Calvin, was not ready to let go of his magnificent delusion. He reached across the table and grabbed the document, ignoring the sheer terror radiating from Preston's pale face. Calvin adjusted his reading glasses and stared at the paper, determined to prove once and for all that I was just a bitter, jealous sister trying to ruin a perfect high society wedding. My father scanned the first page, his eyes darting back and forth across the crisp white paper. I watched his thick brow furrow as he read the undeniable figures, the formal legal letterhead, the unmistakable reality of Preston's financial ruin. But cognitive dissonance is a powerful drug, especially for a man who had built his entire identity around the illusion of success. Calvin scoffed loudly, pushing the folder back across the table with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "This is garbage, Iman," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you honestly expect me to believe you magically own a debt acquisition firm? You probably printed this off some internet scam site to make yourself look important. You always had an overactive imagination, but this is borderline pathological." Brenda let out a sharp breath of relief, nodding vigorously. "Exactly, Calvin," she said, glaring at me. "She is just trying to sabotage Sierra because she cannot stand being the bridesmaid instead of the bride. It is pathetic." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I just reached out and calmly closed the blue folder. "If you choose to ignore the truth, Dad, that is entirely your prerogative," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the emotional reaction they were so desperate to provoke. "But my terms remain exactly the same. I am not wiring $50,000 to a shell company. If this money is truly for the wedding venue, then I will write a certified bank draft directly to the Ritz-Carlton catering department tomorrow morning. Otherwise, you get nothing." Preston's face transformed from pale panic to a sickly shade of gray. The polished high society facade he had maintained all evening began to crack violently. "You cannot do that," he stammered, a nervous sweat breaking out along his hairline. "That violates the terms of my corporate tax shield. The hotel will not accept a third-party draft. It has to come through the primary event contract holder." "That is a complete lie," I stated plainly, watching him squirm. "Hotels accept third-party certified payments for event deposits every single day. They do not care where the money comes from as long as it clears. The only reason you want it routed through your account is because you are drowning in debt and you need my cash to stop the bleeding." Sierra slammed both hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "Stop lying about my fiancé. Iman!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet restaurant, causing several heads to turn in our direction. "He is a millionaire. He manages major portfolios. He does not need your pathetic little data entry savings." "Then he does not need me to wire it to his personal holding fund," I countered smoothly, keeping my eyes locked on Preston. "Call the venue right now, Preston. Put the catering manager on speakerphone. Let us verify the deposit amount, and I will authorize a direct payment right here at the table." Preston looked like a cornered animal. He looked at Sierra, who was nodding in blind agreement, expecting him to easily prove me wrong. He looked at my parents, who were waiting for him to put me in my place with his superior financial knowledge. He was completely trapped in his own web of lies. "I am not calling anyone at this hour!" Preston snapped, his voice rising in pitch. "It is incredibly unprofessional. You are being completely unreasonable, Iman. We are family. We are supposed to trust each other. I am bringing your entire family into the upper echelon of society, and this is how you treat me." "You are bringing us nothing but fraudulent liabilities," I said, leaning forward slightly. "There is no wedding deposit, is there, Preston? The Ritz-Carlton does not even have you on their books." That was the breaking point. Preston's carefully crafted mask shattered completely. His arrogance morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed his fist down on the table, mirroring my father's earlier gesture, but with a frantic, unhinged energy. "You arrogant little idiot," he spat, leaning across the table, his face contorted with fury. "You know nothing about how the world works. I have done more for this family in 6 months than you have done in your entire miserable life. I am the one managing your parents' investments. I am the one who structured the second mortgage on their house to maximize their equity. Without me, they would be nothing." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A sudden, absolute silence descended upon our table, drowning out the soft jazz and the clinking of glasses around us. I froze. My eyes slowly moved from Preston's furious red face to my parents'. My father looked as though he had just been physically struck. The aggressive bluster vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden hollow panic. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at Preston as if he had just detonated a bomb in the middle of our dinner. "A second mortgage?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Sierra looked back and forth between us, clearly confused by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. "What is she talking about, Mom?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "You guys paid off the house years ago." Nobody answered her. The silence stretched out thick with the realization of what Preston had just confessed. I stared at my father, watching the reality of his profound foolishness wash over him. He had not just offered to pay for a lavish wedding. He had not just dipped into his retirement savings to impress his new son-in-law. He had leveraged the only substantial asset he owned. He had secretly taken out a second mortgage on the family home and handed the equity over to a man who was actively being hunted by fraud investigators. "You gave him the house," I said, staring directly into my father's panicked eyes. "You actually mortgaged the house and gave the money to his shell company." Calvin swallowed hard, unable to maintain eye contact with me. He looked down at his half-empty wine glass, his shoulders slumping under the crushing weight of his own hubris. "It was an investment," he mumbled, his voice lacking any of its usual booming authority. "Preston guaranteed a 20% return by the end of the fiscal quarter. It was supposed to pay for the wedding and leave us with a substantial profit. We were building our portfolio, Iman." "You were building his exit strategy," I said, feeling a cold, clinical detachment settle over me. The emotional betrayal did not even register anymore. I was simply analyzing a catastrophic financial ruin playing out in real time. He targeted you because you were desperate to look wealthy. He fed your ego, convinced you to leverage your home, and stole your equity to pay off his existing debts. And when that money ran out, he sent Sierra to bully me into handing over my savings, too. "That is not true," Preston interjected, but his voice lacked any real conviction. He was sweating profusely now, glancing nervously toward the restaurant exit. "The funds are securely invested in high-yield digital assets. It is just temporarily illiquid due to market fluctuations." "It is gone, Preston," I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I have the forensic accounting reports in that blue folder. You funneled their mortgage equity directly into a series of offshore accounts to cover your margin calls. There is no high-yield return. There is no wedding fund. And judging by the panic on your face, you know the authorities are already tracing the transactions." Brenda let out a small, strangled sob, her hands trembling as she clutched her napkin. "Calvin, what is she saying?" My mother whimpered, looking desperately at my father. "Tell her she is lying, Calvin. Tell her the money is safe." But Calvin could not speak. The man who had spent my entire life belittling my intelligence, telling me I was a disappointment, telling me I knew nothing about the real world, was sitting completely paralyzed by his own monumental failure. He had gambled the family home on a con artist who validated his ego, and he had lost everything. Sierra finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of the situation. Her perfect high society wedding was evaporating before her eyes. "But the deposit," she said, her voice trembling. "Preston, you said the money from Mom and Dad was securing the venue." Preston stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his water glass. "I do not have to sit here and be interrogated by a jealous clerk," he snapped, adjusting his suit jacket with shaking hands. "I am leaving. When you all decide to stop listening to this hysterical nonsense and want to discuss real business, you can call my office." He did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel and practically sprinted toward the restaurant exit, abandoning his fiancée and the family he had just financially ruined. I sat quietly in the booth, watching him disappear into the night, knowing exactly how long it would be before my firm froze his remaining accounts. Sierra broke the silence with a shrill, piercing scream. She grabbed her phone from the table, her manicured fingers flying across the screen as she frantically dialed Preston's number. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed again and again, her breath hitching in her throat while my parents sat paralyzed in their expensive leather booth. "Iman, what did you do?" Sierra shrieked, slamming her phone down onto the polished wood. "You ruined my wedding. You scared him away with your fake documents and your pathetic jealousy. He is probably calling his lawyers right now because of you." I did not say a word to her. I calmly reached across the table and pulled the thick blue folder back toward me, sliding it neatly into my leather briefcase. I snapped the brass locks shut. The sharp metallic click seemed to jolt my father out of his catatonic state. He blinked rapidly, staring at the empty space where Preston had just been sitting, his chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic breaths. "Calvin," my mother whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifying vulnerability I had never heard before. "Calvin, Tell me that boy was lying. Tell me our house is safe. Tell me you did not actually sign anything." My father did not look at her. He did not look at me. He just stared blankly at the white linen tablecloth, his jaw slack, his skin a sickly grayish hue. The booming patriarch who had dominated my entire life, who had constantly mocked my career and belittled my intelligence, was entirely broken. He had handed the keys to his kingdom to a charismatic fraud, and now the castle was collapsing around him. I slid out of the booth and stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored black suit. I left a crisp $100 bill on the table to cover the drinks they had ordered before I arrived. I did not owe them an explanation. I did not owe them comfort. I turned and walked out of the Capitol Grill, leaving them alone with the devastating reality they had created for themselves. The drive back to my apartment was silent. I kept the radio off, letting the quiet hum of the engine soothe my racing mind. I thought I would feel a profound sense of triumphant vindication, but there was only a cold, hollow clarity. My parents had actively conspired to hand over their wealth to a stranger simply because he fit their aesthetic ideal of success. They had kept it a secret from me, knowing I would have investigated him and uncovered the truth. As soon as I walked through my heavy wooden door, I went straight to the kitchen table and woke up my encrypted laptop. The screen cast a pale blue glow across the chipped laminate countertop. Preston had let a crucial piece of information slip in his panic. He mentioned a second mortgage. He mentioned structuring their equity. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I logged into the secure asset tracking portal my firm used for high-level real estate investigations. I bypassed the standard public searches and accessed the direct county registry database for Fulton County, Georgia. I typed in the address of my parents' ancestral home in Atlanta. It was a beautiful, sprawling brick house that my grandfather had built with his own hands. It was the centerpiece of our family legacy, fully paid off decades ago and supposedly held in a bulletproof family trust. The search results populated on my screen in a matter of seconds. I clicked on the deed history and the financial encumbrances tab. My eyes scanned the dense legal text and numerical data. When I saw the figures, my breath caught in my throat. 6 months ago, just 3 weeks after Sierra excitedly announced her engagement to Preston Covington, Calvin and Brenda had quietly dissolved the family trust. They had legally removed the protective barriers my grandfather had established, and they had taken out a massive subprime equity loan against the property. The numbers were staggering. They had borrowed $850,000, pulling nearly 90% of the home's total equity. I looked at the interest rate and felt a wave of genuine nausea. It was a predatory subprime loan carrying an adjustable interest rate of 14%. It was the kind of financial suicide contract that only desperate people signed. People who had been convinced they were making a brilliant short-term maneuver to double their wealth overnight. I tracked the disbursement of the loan funds through the registry. The entire $850,000 had been wired in a single lump sum to Apex Crypto Ventures Limited Liability Company. My parents had literally handed over their entire generational wealth to Preston's fake startup. They believed they were funding a high society wedding and investing in a revolutionary tech fund that would elevate them into the financial elite. Instead, they had paid for Preston's leased luxury cars, his expensive designer suits, and the margin calls on his failing investments. I dug deeper, pulling up the current status of the subprime loan. My parents had not made a single mortgage payment in 4 months. They were probably waiting for Preston to issue them their promised quarterly dividend from his fake crypto fund. They had been surviving on blind faith and Preston's smooth corporate assurances, while the interest capitalized and compounded against them. The database showed a bright red flag attached to the property deed. A formal notice of default had been filed by the lending institution exactly 48 hours ago. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. In less than 30 days, the house my grandfather built, the house my parents used as their ultimate status symbol, would be seized and auctioned off to the highest bidder. They were bankrupt. They were completely and utterly destitute. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. When Sierra marched into my apartment yesterday demanding my life savings, she was not just being a spoiled bride trying to impress the Covington family. My parents had sent her. They were entirely out of cash. Their credit cards were likely maxed out, trying to keep up appearances, and they were desperate for liquid capital to cover their tracks before the bottom fell out. They had wanted me to empty my bank accounts to save their sinking ship. They were willing to bankrupt their youngest daughter to protect the golden child's wedding and hide their monumental stupidity from the world. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. My father had sat across from me at the restaurant tonight, insulting my intelligence and mocking my job, while knowing he was weeks away from being homeless. He had demanded I hand my money over to the very man who had just stolen his entire net worth. I closed the laptop, shutting off the blue light, leaving me in the dark kitchen. The silence of my apartment felt different now. It was no longer the silence of an outcast sister. It was the heavy, absolute silence of the only person in the family who had any power left. The house of cards had officially collapsed. Now it was only a matter of time before they came crawling to my door. The morning sun hit the glass facade of my downtown office building blindingly bright as I stepped out of the elevator. I walked past the reception desk, where the brass lettering spelled out Apex Financial Solutions. My lead acquisition director, Marcus, was already waiting in my corner office. He held a thick stack of finalized contracts. We had been negotiating the purchase of a massive distressed asset portfolio from a major national bank for weeks. The bank was desperate to offload billions in toxic subprime loans before their quarterly earnings report. We were buying the debt for pennies on the dollar. I sat down in my leather executive chair and took the heavy pen Marcus handed me. "The preliminary acquisition went through escrow 3 days ago," Marcus said, tapping the top page. "But the final tranche cleared the Federal Reserve this morning. We are officially the primary lien holders on 47,000 defaulted properties and corporate shell accounts across the Southeast." I pulled the master spreadsheet toward me. I did not need to scan the entire list. I already knew what I was looking for after my late-night investigation into the county registry. I typed the address of my parents' ancestral home into the search bar of my terminal. The screen blinked and the property details populated instantly. There it was, a subprime equity loan for $850,000. The original lender had bundled it into the toxic debt portfolio we just acquired. My parents had failed to make a payment for 4 months, and the bank had washed their hands of it, selling it to my firm to recoup their losses. I scrolled down the connected accounts and found the matching corporate entity, Apex Crypto Ventures. Preston's fraudulent shell company was bundled right alongside my parents' mortgage. He had defaulted on his initial business loans, and the bank had swept all of his associated liabilities into the same garbage pile they just sold to me. I highlighted both rows on my screen. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice entirely detached, "I need you to carve these 2 specific accounts out of the automated collections algorithm. Do not send them to the call center. Route these deeds directly to my personal executive portfolio. I am taking direct ownership of these assets." Marcus nodded, not questioning my directives. He took the paperwork and left the office, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I leaned back and looked at the digital deed on my monitor. I was now legally the primary debt holder of my parents' entire life, and the owner of every single fraudulent debt Preston Covington had ever accumulated. I literally owned the roof over my father's head. My phone began to vibrate on the mahogany desk. The caller ID flashed with my father's name. The automated notification from his original bank must have just hit his email, alerting him that his mortgage had been sold to an aggressive debt acquisition firm. He probably saw the name of my company on the transfer notice and recognized it from the blue folder I had dropped on the restaurant table last night. I let it ring 5 times before I calmly picked it up. "Iman," my father barked, his voice tight and breathless. It lacked the booming authority he usually weaponized against me. He sounded like an old, frightened man. "What is going on? I just got an email from my bank saying my mortgage was sold to Apex Financial Solutions. That is your company, the one from the restaurant." "That is correct, Calvin," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on my desk. "My firm finalized the purchase of a distressed asset portfolio this morning. Your defaulted subprime loan was bundled into the package. I am now your primary creditor." There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his shallow breathing. "You bought my house?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. "You bought the debt on your own parents' house." "I bought 47,000 defaulted properties this morning," I corrected him, my tone clinical and precise. "Your house just happened to be in the garbage pile your bank discarded. You have not made a payment in 4 months, Calvin. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. You were 30 days away from a public auction." He sputtered, searching for a way to regain the upper hand. He reverted to his default setting, which was arrogant entitlement. "Well, this is actually perfect," he said, forcing a nervous chuckle. "Since you own the debt, you can just cancel it. You can write it off as a family gift. We can clear this whole misunderstanding up and get back to focusing on Sierra's wedding." I stared at the city skyline outside my window, marveling at his absolute detachment from reality. He had mortgaged his family legacy to a con artist, insulted my intelligence, defended the man who robbed him, and now expected me to absorb an $850,000 loss just to save his bruised ego. "I am not a charity, Calvin," I said softly. "I run a debt acquisition firm. You signed a legally binding contract for a subprime equity loan at a 14% interest rate. You wired the entire lump sum to a fraudulent shell company owned by Preston Covington. A company that I also legally own now, by the way." "Iman, you listen to me," my father shouted, the panic returning in full force. "You are my daughter. You owe me respect. Family takes care of family. You cannot foreclose on your own flesh and blood." I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. "Last night you sat in a restaurant and told me I was no longer a part of this family." I reminded him, my voice cold as ice. "You told me I was a bitter, jealous woman because I refused to hand my life savings over to a criminal. You chose Preston. You chose Sierra. You chose the illusion of high society over your own daughter." He stammered, trying to form an excuse, but I cut him off. "The house of cards has collapsed, Calvin," I said. "You have 72 hours to produce the missed mortgage payments, plus the compounding interest and the late fees. If the funds are not wired to my corporate account by Friday at noon, my legal team will execute the foreclosure. I will take the house." I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the desk. It immediately began to vibrate again. This time it was Sierra. I ignored it. I watched the screen light up with missed calls from my mother, my father, and my sister. They were finally realizing that the daughter they had treated like a doormat was the only one holding the keys to their survival, and I was not going to open the door. The rehearsal dinner was held in the private banquet room of an exclusive downtown country club. 50 guests were seated around heavy oak tables draped in white silk and covered in cascading arrangements of imported white roses. The ambient lighting cast a warm golden glow over the crystal stemware and polished silver. It was a picture of absolute affluence, and every single detail was funded by the toxic subprime loan my parents had secretly taken out against their home. Sierra sat at the head table wearing a custom designer gown that cost more than my first car. She was glowing with the radiant arrogance of a woman who believed she had finally secured her rightful place among the elite. She laughed loudly, tossing her perfectly styled hair and holding her hand up so the guests could admire her massive diamond ring. Next to her sat Preston. He was wearing his usual tailored dark suit, but his confident swagger was completely gone. His skin was pale and covered in a thin sheen of nervous sweat. He kept checking his phone and glancing toward the heavy wooden exit doors. He looked like a man who expected federal investigators to walk into the room at any second. He knew the walls were closing in, and he knew I was the one pulling the strings. Calvin sat on the other side of Sierra, looking infinitely worse than Preston. My father had aged 10 years in the last 48 hours. He stared blankly at his untouched plate of roasted duck, his jaw slack and his eyes hollow. He knew the deadline I had given him was expiring tomorrow at noon. He knew he did not have the money to save the ancestral home, and he knew his entire life was a lie. He was a king presiding over a kingdom of ashes. Brenda, however, was entirely in her element. She fluttered around the room, greeting extended family members and wealthy friends with a loud artificial laugh. Calvin must have lied to her to keep up appearances. He must have told her he had the financial situation under control because she showed absolutely no signs of a woman whose house was about to be foreclosed on. She was completely intoxicated by the illusion of her own high society status. I sat at a small corner table far away from the bridal party. I wore a simple navy dress and sipped my sparkling water in silence. Several aunts and cousins shot me pitying looks throughout the evening. They had clearly been fed a narrative about my jealousy and my supposed financial struggles. I let them whisper and stare. Their opinions meant absolutely nothing to me now that I legally owned the ground my parents walked on. The waiters cleared the main course plates and began pouring expensive vintage champagne for the toasts. Brenda stood up and tapped her silver spoon against her crystal flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the low hum of conversation. 50 faces turned toward the front of the room as a hush fell over the banquet hall. Brenda beamed at the audience, projecting the image of a proud, successful matriarch who had secured her family's ultimate legacy. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Brenda began, her voice echoing loudly through the room. "We are gathered here to celebrate the union of two absolutely incredible people, Sierra and Preston." The guests applauded politely. Sierra smiled brightly and leaned her head on Preston's shoulder. Preston forced a rigid, agonizing smile and took a massive gulp of his champagne. Brenda continued her speech, laying the groundwork for her grand delusion. "Calvin and I always knew Sierra was destined for greatness. We always knew she would find a man who matched her ambition and her impeccable pedigree. When she brought Preston home, we knew instantly that he was the one. He is not just a brilliant mind in the financial sector. He is a true gentleman who understands the immense value of building wealth and preserving family legacy." I watched my father physically flinch at the word wealth. He closed his eyes tightly as if trying to block out the sound of my mother's voice. He knew Preston's brilliant financial mind was nothing but a sophisticated scam that had drained their entire net worth in a matter of months. "We wanted to give Sierra the wedding of her dreams," Brenda declared, placing a hand dramatically over her heart. "Calvin and I have worked our entire lives to be in a position to provide this level of excellence for our children. We spared no expense tonight because our family deserves nothing but the absolute best. It has been a monumental financial effort, but seeing the joy on Sierra's face makes every single sacrifice completely worth it." The sheer audacity of her words was breathtaking. She was standing in a room paid for by a predatory subprime equity loan, taking full credit for a display of wealth that was entirely fraudulent. She was painting herself and Calvin as generous benefactors while completely erasing the fact that they had tried to force me to empty my life savings to fund this exact charade. She did not mention the demands they made in my apartment. She did not mention the insults they hurled at me when I refused to surrender my hard-earned money to Preston's offshore shell company. She was rewriting history in real time, portraying herself as a selfless provider and a titan of industry. And then she delivered the final insult. Brenda turned her gaze toward my dark corner of the room. Her eyes locked onto mine and her smile turned sharp and condescending. "We all know that success is not easy to understand for everyone," Brenda said, her voice dripping with weaponized pity. "Sometimes those who cannot achieve greatness become deeply resentful of those who do. It can be difficult for certain family members to watch others ascend to the top and leave them behind. But tonight we choose to focus only on positivity and the incredible affluent future that Preston and Sierra are building together. We will not let small-minded negativity or bitter jealousy tarnish this beautiful milestone." A heavy, uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Several guests shifted awkwardly in their seats, glancing in my direction with wide eyes. They all knew exactly who Brenda was talking about. She had just publicly labeled me as the bitter, jealous sister who was failing at life. She had used her rehearsal dinner toast to humiliate me and elevate Sierra to the status of a goddess. I did not look away. I held her gaze with a calm, steady expression. I did not blush or cry or jump up to defend my honor. I simply picked up my glass of sparkling water and raised it in a silent, mocking toast. Brenda looked slightly unsettled by my complete lack of a reaction, but she quickly recovered, turning her attention back to the golden couple at the head table. To Preston and Sierra, she cheered, raising her champagne flute high into the air. May your lives be as rich and abundant as the love we surround you with tonight. The guests raised their glasses and echoed the cheer. Preston drank deeply, his eyes darting toward me over the rim of his glass. He looked absolutely terrified. He knew that I was sitting there holding the master deed to his fake company and the deed to my parents' house in my executive portfolio. He knew that the rich and abundant future Brenda was bragging about was scheduled to be legally repossessed at noon tomorrow. Calvin did not even raise his glass. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, like a dead man walking. He had heard my mother's entire speech about family legacy and wealth, knowing he had permanently destroyed both. The applause died down, and the string quartet resumed playing a soft classical melody. I set my glass back down on the table. The performance was over. My mother had taken her shot, and she had missed completely. She had spent the entire evening bragging about a fortune that no longer existed and insulting the only person in the world who had the power to save them from ruin. I looked at the digital clock on my phone. It was 8 o'clock on Thursday evening. The deadline for the missed mortgage payments and the compounded subprime interest was exactly 16 hours away. I had given my father a generous chance to come clean to his wife and his golden child. He had clearly chosen cowardice and deception instead. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. The anxiety and the hurt that had plagued me for years were completely gone, evaporated into the cool night air. I was no longer the disappointing daughter or the socially unfit outcast. I was the silent architect of their impending reality check. I watched them laugh and drink their expensive champagne, enjoying the final few hours of their artificial paradise. Tomorrow the sun would rise, and the true cost of their arrogance would finally come due. The applause following my mother's speech eventually faded, giving way to the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of polite conversation. The string quartet shifted into a lively waltz, desperately trying to inject some warmth back into the banquet hall. I remained seated in my quiet corner, watching the elaborate performance unfold around me. I took another sip of my sparkling water, enjoying the cool, crisp taste as I observed the shifting dynamics of the room. My father was still frozen in his seat, staring at the white linen tablecloth. He looked like a statue carved from gray stone. Sierra, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with self-importance. She stood up from the head table and began working the room, dragging a visibly sweating Preston behind her by the hand. They were playing the roles of the perfect high society couple, greeting guests and accepting lavish praise. But Preston's eyes kept darting back to me. Every time our gazes met, he looked away instantly, his jaw clenching in absolute terror. I was perfectly content to sit in silence and watch the clock tick closer to their financial doom when two figures detached themselves from the crowd and glided toward my table. It was Arthur and Eleanor Covington, Preston's parents. They were the very picture of old money arrogance. Eleanor wore a pearl gray evening gown that reeked of expensive boutiques, and her neck was heavy with diamonds. Arthur wore a bespoke tuxedo and carried himself with the inflated posture of a man who believed his mere presence was a gift to the room. They approached my small table uninvited. Eleanor offered a smile that was entirely devoid of any actual warmth. Her eyes swept over my simple navy dress, cataloging its lack of a designer label and finding me woefully inadequate. "You must be Iman," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet condescension. "Brenda has told us so much about you. We just had to come over and introduce ourselves. I am Eleanor, and this is my husband Arthur." I did not stand up. I simply folded my hands on the table and offered a polite nod. "It is a pleasure to meet you both," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "We wanted to make sure you were not feeling too lonely over here all by yourself," Arthur said, pulling out a chair and sitting down without waiting for an invitation. Eleanor sat next to him, resting her diamond-ringed hand on the table. "We know today must be terribly difficult for you," Arthur continued, leaning forward with a patronizing sigh. "It is never easy watching a younger sibling achieve such monumental success, especially when your own life is so ordinary." Eleanor patted my arm, her touch feeling like a cold weight. Your mother explained everything to us, dear, she murmured, leaning in as if sharing a confidential secret. She told us how hard you work at your little data entry job and how you struggle to make ends meet. It is incredibly brave of you to show your face tonight. It takes a very special kind of person to accept their limitations and be content with such a modest lifestyle. I looked at Eleanor and then at Arthur. They were completely oblivious to the reality of their surroundings. They believed they were the royalty of the evening, graciously offering pity to a struggling peasant. They had no idea that their brilliant son was a criminal. They had no idea that the lavish dinner they were currently enjoying was funded by a predatory loan that I legally owned. I smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that caused a flicker of confusion to cross Eleanor's heavily powdered face. I appreciate your concern, Eleanor, I said, my voice smooth and melodic. I actually find that living modestly keeps me incredibly grounded. It allows me to focus on the intricate details of my work rather than getting distracted by the illusion of status. My job requires a great deal of analytical focus. In fact, since you are a man of finance, Arthur, perhaps you could indulge a professional curiosity of mine. Arthur puffed out his chest, clearly eager to demonstrate his superior intellect. Of course, my dear, he said, waving his hand magnanimously. I am always happy to impart some wisdom to the younger generation. What is your question? I adjusted my posture, leaning slightly closer to them. I was just reviewing some fascinating case law regarding federal financial compliance, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. Specifically, I am curious about your thoughts on the Securities and Exchange Commission regulations regarding offshore shell companies. How exactly does the Commission handle corporate officers who funnel subprime residential equity into dummy crypto accounts to hide their failing margin calls? The air around our table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Arthur's patronizing smile froze on his face. His thick eyebrows drew together in deep confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form a single word, a sudden violent sound shattered the quiet corner of the room. Preston, who had been walking past our table with a fresh glass of red wine, had stopped dead in his tracks. He had heard every single word of my very specific legal question. He inhaled sharply, pulling a massive gulp of wine directly into his windpipe. He began choking violently. He doubled over, coughing and hacking his face, turning a dangerous shade of purple. The wine spilled over the rim of his crystal glass, splashing dark red stains across the pristine white front of his expensive tuxedo shirt. He gasped for air, clutching his chest, as he desperately tried to clear his lungs. Sierra shrieked and rushed to his side, pounding frantically on his back. "Preston, baby, are you okay?" she cried, her voice shrill with panic. "Somebody get him some water." The entire room turned to watch the groom hacking and wheezing by my table. Arthur and Eleanor stood up instantly, their faces etched with shock and concern. They rushed toward their son, leaving my question hanging unanswered in the air. I sat perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold with absolute detachment. Preston finally managed to draw a ragged breath. He stood up straight, his eyes watering, his face flushed with profound humiliation and terror. He looked directly at me. He knew that I was not just making idle threats in a restaurant booth. I was demonstrating that I held the power to destroy his entire life, and I was perfectly willing to do it in front of his own parents. He grabbed Sierra's arm, his fingers digging into her wrist. "We need to leave," he rasped, his voice hoarse and broken. "We need to leave right now." Sierra looked at him in total bewilderment. "Preston, what are you talking about? We have not even cut the cake yet." "I said we are leaving," he growled, dragging her toward the heavy wooden exit doors. I watched them flee the banquet hall, leaving Arthur and Eleanor standing in stunned silence. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and took a slow, satisfying sip. The warning shot had been fired, and it had hit its mark with flawless precision. The clock was still ticking, and tomorrow at noon I was taking the house. The grand exit of Preston and Sierra left a vacuum in the banquet room, but my mother was never one to let a stage sit empty. She immediately snapped her fingers at the catering staff, demanding more champagne, and ordering the string quartet to play something upbeat. The rehearsal dinner limped to a close under a cloud of unspoken tension. I stayed just long enough to finish my sparkling water before making my way back to the luxury hotel where my parents had booked the bridal suite. It was the night before the wedding, and tradition dictated that the bridal party gather for a final evening of forced bonding and staged photographs. When I pushed open the heavy double doors of the penthouse suite, the air was thick with the smell of expensive hairspray and wilting floral arrangements. A hired photographer was hovering in the corner, adjusting his lighting equipment. 6 bridesmaids dressed in matching silk pajamas were lounging on white leather sofas, sipping Prosecco and trying to look relaxed. Sierra was pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, frantically texting on her phone. Preston was nowhere to be seen. He had likely barricaded himself in his own room, trying to figure out how to escape the country before federal investigators froze his passport. My father was conspicuously absent as well. He had probably retreated to the hotel bar to drown his impending bankruptcy in top-shelf scotch. But Brenda was there. My mother was operating on pure manic energy. Her eyes were wide and glittering with a desperate need to maintain the illusion of control. She was holding a clipboard and directing the bridesmaids like a drill sergeant, orchestrating the perfect high society sleepover. When she saw me walk into the suite, her entire posture changed. She straightened her spine, plastered a massive artificial smile onto her face, and marched across the plush carpet toward me. She made sure to position herself so the hired photographer had a clear angle of us both. "Iman, darling, you made it," she announced. Her voice projected loudly enough to ensure every single person in the penthouse stopped talking and looked in our direction. "I was starting to worry you were going to hide in your room all night. Come here and join the celebration." I stepped further into the suite, my leather briefcase still clutched in my hand. "I am just here to observe Brenda," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It is quite a production you have put together tonight." She ignored my tone and reached out, grabbing my arm with fingers that dug into my skin like claws. She pulled me toward the center of the room where the lighting was brightest. The bridesmaids watched us with poorly concealed curiosity. Sierra finally looked up from her phone, her eyes red-rimmed and frantic. "Listen, everyone," Brenda called out, waving her free hand to command the room. "Tomorrow is the biggest day of Sierra's life. She is marrying into one of the most prominent families in the financial world, and we are so incredibly proud. But tonight is about our family. It is about the bonds that hold us together and the legacy we share." She gestured for the photographer to step closer. He raised his camera, the flash firing twice in rapid succession, illuminating the desperate sheen of sweat on my mother's forehead. "As you all know," Brenda continued, her voice taking on a sickly sweet cadence, "our family believes in supporting each other. Calvin and I have already provided the primary funding for this spectacular wedding, but it is a tradition in our circle for siblings to demonstrate their love and support through a meaningful contribution to the new couple's future." I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. She was actually doing this. She was attempting a public ambush. She had cornered me in front of an audience of wealthy bridesmaids and a professional photographer to shame me into compliance. It was a classic narcissistic maneuver, weaponizing peer pressure and social expectations to force my hand. Brenda reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out a long, rectangular piece of heavy stock paper. It was a blank, novelty-sized bank check, the kind used for charity photo opportunities. She thrust a silver fountain pen toward me, her eyes wide and pleading, but carrying a vicious underlying threat. "Iman, your sister and Preston are building a magnificent life," she said, her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. "We know you have been saving up from your little office job. We thought tonight would be the perfect moment for you to present Sierra with your wedding gift. $100,000 is the standard benchmark for a sibling of our standing. Just write it out, sign it, and we will take a beautiful family photo to commemorate your generosity." The sheer delusion was staggering. She was standing in a hotel suite paid for by a defaulted subprime loan, holding a giant piece of cardboard and demanding my life savings for a photo op. The bridesmaids murmured appreciatively, completely unaware of the financial apocalypse looming over the family. Sierra crossed her arms, glaring at me, daring me to ruin her moment. She was counting on my lifelong habit of backing down to avoid a public scene. But I was no longer the scapegoat they could bully into submission. I did not take the pen. I did not reach for the giant check. I stood perfectly still, letting the silence stretch out until the murmurs died down and the air in the room grew heavy and suffocating. I am not signing that, Brenda. I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly across the quiet suite. My mother's artificial smile faltered, her eyes flashing with sudden venom. Do not be difficult, Iman, she hissed, keeping her voice low but her tone threatening. Everyone is watching. You are embarrassing yourself. Just sign the check and smile for the camera. We need to show the Covingtons that we are unified and financially robust. You are not financially robust, I replied, maintaining my calm composure, turning my body slightly so the entire room could hear my words. You are entirely bankrupt. You do not have a legacy to share. You mortgaged the house you raised us in to a con artist who is currently packing his bags to flee the state. One of the bridesmaids gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hand. The photographer slowly lowered his camera, realizing he was capturing something far beyond a standard wedding dispute. Sierra dropped her phone on the carpet, her face draining of all color as she realized the gravity of what I was revealing to her closest friends. Shut up! Brenda shrieked, her mask finally shattering into a million pieces. How dare you speak to me like that in front of our guests? You are a jealous, bitter little girl trying to ruin your sister's happiness because no man would ever want you. You owe us this money. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. I own the roof over your head, I stated simply, cutting through her hysterical rant. My words struck her like a physical blow. I own the mortgage you defaulted on. I hold the deed to the ancestral home you threw away. Tomorrow at noon, when the deadline expires, I am executing the foreclosure. You will have exactly 30 days to vacate the property before the sheriff locks you out. Brenda took a step back, stumbling slightly as if the floor had given way beneath her. She looked wildly around the room at the shocked faces of the bridesmaids, at her trembling daughter, and finally back at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The illusion she had sacrificed everything to protect was officially dead. The fake wealth, the forced prestige, the arrogant superiority, it was all gone. You wanted a photo opportunity to capture this moment, I said, looking directly into the camera lens of the stunned photographer. Go ahead and take it. Take a picture of a woman who traded her entire life for a lie. I turned away from my mother, leaving her gasping for air in the center of the extravagant suite. I walked past the silent bridesmaids and the weeping bride, pushing open the heavy double doors and stepping out into the quiet hallway. I did not look back. There was nothing left to say. The final demand had been denied, and the house of cards had completely fallen. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The morning sun broke through the heavy curtains of my hotel room. I had slept perfectly. I dressed in a sharp charcoal business suit. Today was not a day for wedding attire. It was a day for corporate execution. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked across the street to the historic cathedral where the ceremony was scheduled to begin in 3 hours. The air was crisp and clear. I felt a profound sense of purpose with every step I took. I carried 4 sleek black corporate folders under my arm. The embossed silver logo of Apex Financial Solutions gleamed in the morning light. I found my family in the private bridal parlor tucked away in the back of the cathedral. The room smelled of expensive lilies and absolute desperation. Sierra was wearing her white silk getting ready robe. Her makeup was only half finished, and her face was stained with dark streaks of mascara. Brenda was pacing the length of the oriental rug, muttering angrily under her breath. Calvin sat in a velvet armchair looking like he had not slept in weeks. Preston stood near the stained glass window, frantically whispering into his cell phone. When I opened the heavy wooden door, all 4 of them snapped their heads toward me. The tension in the room was thick and suffocating. Iman, how dare you show your face here, Brenda hissed, stepping toward me with her fists clenched tight. You ruined the rehearsal dinner with your pathetic lies and your bad attitude. You embarrassed us in front of the Covingtons. You owe your sister an apology right now. I did not apologize. I walked calmly into the center of the room. I looked at the 4 people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless and invisible. I am not here to apologize, Brenda. I said, my voice completely void of emotion. I am here to deliver the wedding gifts you requested last night. I believe you wanted a tangible demonstration of our family wealth to show everyone for your little photo opportunity. I handed the first black folder to Sierra. She took it with trembling hands, her eyes darting nervously between me and her mother. I handed the second folder to Brenda. I placed the third folder directly on Calvin's lap. I walked over to the tall stained glass window and held the final folder out to Preston. Preston stared at the folder like it was a loaded weapon. He slowly lowered his phone and took it from my hand without saying a single word. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. "What is this nonsense?" Brenda demanded, tapping her manicured fingernails against the thick leather cover. "Is this some kind of sick joke, Iman? Are you trying to ruin this beautiful day for us?" "Open it," I instructed simply. "I think you will find the contents extremely enlightening." Brenda flipped her folder open with an angry huff. Sierra and Calvin did the same. Preston did not even bother to open his folder because he already knew exactly what was hiding inside. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the bridal parlor. The only sound was the rustle of thick paper as my family stared at the irrefutable evidence of their complete financial ruin. There was no novelty check for $100,000 inside those folders. There was only the brutal clinical reality of public records and corporate accounting. The first page was a copy of the master deed to my parents' ancestral home. It clearly showed Apex Financial Solutions as the primary legal lien holder. Attached to the deed was the official notice of foreclosure. It stated in bold black letters that the property would be legally repossessed at noon today. The second page was Preston's personal credit report. It was an absolute disaster of compounding debt and missed payments spanning back over 5 long years. It painted a vivid picture of a desperate man who lived entirely on maxed-out credit cards and empty promises. He had no assets. He had no trust fund. He had absolutely nothing to his name. The third page was the most damning piece of evidence. It was a drafted declaration of bankruptcy that Preston had prepared 2 months ago but never officially filed. He had been secretly planning to declare personal bankruptcy the very moment he legally tied himself to Sierra's imaginary fortune. "What is this?" Sierra whispered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form the words. She flipped through the pages, staring blindly at the bankruptcy drafts and the offshore shell company records. "Preston, what does all of this mean?" Preston could not look at her. He stared at the hardwood floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. Drops of cold sweat beaded on his pale forehead. "It means your brilliant financial genius is completely broke, Sierra," I explained, walking slowly around the room. "He does not have a trust fund. He does not have a successful investment portfolio. He is a cheap con artist who preyed on your desperate need for high society status." Brenda's face turned a mottled shade of angry red. "This is a forgery!" she shouted, waving the foreclosure notice wildly in the air. "This is a pathetic attempt to frame Preston because you are incredibly jealous of his success. You mocked up these fake documents to ruin your sister's special day because you are a bitter, lonely woman." I turned my attention to my father. Calvin still sat in the velvet armchair staring down at the foreclosure notice with dead empty eyes. "Tell her, Calvin," I commanded. "Tell your wife about the toxic subprime equity loan you secretly took out against the house. Tell her how you willingly wired $850,000 to Preston's fake crypto company because you thought he was going to miraculously double your retirement fund." Brenda dropped the folder on the floor and stared at my father. "Calvin," her voice trembled, losing all of its previous arrogant bravado. "Calvin, tell me she is lying right now. Tell me you did not mortgage our beautiful home." Calvin slowly buried his face in his hands, letting out a long, agonizing groan that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. He could not look at his furious wife. He could not look at his precious golden child. His utter silence was the only confirmation they needed to know their world was over. Sierra let out a piercing scream and threw her folder directly at Preston's chest. The heavy paper documents scattered across the oriental rug like dead leaves. "You lied to me," she sobbed, hitting his arm with her balled-up fists. "You told me we were moving to a luxury penthouse in the city. You told me we were buying a private yacht. You are completely broke, you miserable fraud. Preston finally snapped under the immense pressure. He grabbed Sierra's wrists and shoved her roughly away from him. Look at your own pathetic family, Sierra, he yelled, his face twisting into an ugly, hateful sneer. Your parents are just as broke as I am. They took out a garbage subprime loan to pay for this ridiculous, lavish wedding because they are obsessed with looking rich. We were both playing the exact same game and we both lost. The brutal truth echoed through the small bridal parlor, shattering every single illusion they had spent years meticulously building. They were all frauds. They were all desperately clinging to a fake lifestyle they could not possibly afford, and they had all destroyed each other in the relentless process. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. It was exactly 9 in the morning. You have exactly 3 hours until the foreclosure is finalized, Calvin, I said, my voice easily cutting through the chaotic sounds of Sierra's sobbing and Brenda's gasping. I highly suggest you skip the wedding ceremony and start packing your belongings into garbage bags. As for you, Preston, the federal financial authorities have already been thoroughly notified about your illegal offshore accounts. I turned and walked toward the heavy wooden door, leaving them to drown in the miserable reality of their own making. The final demand had been met not with a novelty check, but with the absolute unvarnished truth. I stepped out into the quiet hallway and closed the door firmly behind me. I stood in the hushed corridor of the luxury hotel, listening to the muffled chaos erupting behind the heavy wooden doors. I did not have to wait long. Less than 10 seconds later, the doors burst open and slammed violently against the wall. Brenda stormed out into the hallway, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Calvin was right behind her, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Iman, stop right there!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing down the elegant corridor. "Do not you dare walk away from me after pulling a stunt like this." I turned slowly to face them, keeping my posture completely relaxed. I watched as my mother marched up to me, waving the black corporate folder in my face. She was shaking with anger, her knuckles white as she gripped the heavy paper. "You actually thought we would believe this garbage," Brenda spat, throwing the folder onto the carpet between us. "You thought you could just print out some fake documents and destroy your sister's wedding. I always knew you were jealous, Iman, but this is a new low even for you." Forging financial records to frame Preston and Calvin is absolutely pathetic and bordering on criminal. I looked down at the folder lying on the ornate hotel carpet and then back up at my mother. I was truly amazed by her endless capacity for delusion. She was literally holding the proof of her own destruction, but her mind completely refused to process it. She desperately needed me to be the villain so she could keep playing the victim. She needed the illusion of her high society life to remain intact at all costs. I did not forge a single piece of paper, Brenda. I stated, my voice perfectly calm and level. Everything in that folder is a matter of public record. You can log on to the county registry website right now and see the lien on your property for yourself. Calvin stepped forward, trying to summon the booming authority he usually used to silence me. It was a miserable failure. His voice cracked and his hands were trembling uncontrollably. "You listen to me, young lady," Calvin barked, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "I will not allow you to stand here and slander this family. I do not know how you mocked up these fake foreclosure notices, but my legal team will destroy you for this. You are trying to ruin Sierra's life because you cannot stand the fact that she found a wealthy man while you have nothing. Preston comes from an elite family, and they will not stand for this defamation." I stared at my father, feeling a profound sense of disgust. He was still trying to maintain the illusion of control, still trying to protect his fragile ego, even as his entire world burned to the ground. He knew the documents were real, but he was too much of a coward to admit it to his wife. "You do not have a legal team, Calvin," I said coldly. "You do not even have a checking account balance. You have exactly $14.32 left in your primary account. You have not made a single mortgage payment in 4 months. You ignored the certified letters from the bank. You ignored the phone calls from the debt collectors. You thought you could just sweep it under the rug until Preston magically doubled your money in his offshore accounts." Brenda let out a loud, dramatic scoff, crossing her arms over her chest. "Do not listen to her, Calvin," she said, rolling her eyes. She is just making up numbers to sound important. Our bank would never sell our mortgage. We are premium clients. We have been banking with them for 30 years. And even if there was a slight misunderstanding, Preston's parents would clear it up in a heartbeat. They are billionaires, Iman. They are not going to let a jealous sister stop this wedding. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my mother, closing the physical distance between us. I looked directly into her eyes, preparing to strip away every last shred of her denial. You were premium clients, Brenda, I corrected her. But then your husband took out an $850,000 subprime equity loan at a predatory 14% interest rate. He wired the entire lump sum to a fraudulent crypto shell company owned by Preston Covington. When the market dipped and the margin calls hit, Preston lost absolutely everything. Your bank panicked. They realized your loan was completely toxic and you had no means to repay it. So they bundled your defaulted mortgage into a massive portfolio of distressed assets and sold it to the highest bidder to recoup their massive losses. Brenda stared at me, her confident sneer finally beginning to falter. Her eyes darted to Calvin, looking for him to confidently deny it, but Calvin was staring at his expensive leather shoes, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And do you know who the highest bidder was, Brenda? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do you know who bought that portfolio of toxic debt this morning? She did not answer. She could barely breathe. The color was rapidly draining from her cheeks. Apex Financial Solutions. I said, spelling out the words slowly and clearly. The firm that finalized the acquisition of 47,000 defaulted properties at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. That is my firm, Brenda. I am the founder and the chief executive officer. I bought your debt for pennies on the dollar. The bank washed their hands of you, and they legally handed your entire life over to me. Brenda stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked like she had just been struck by lightning. She turned to Calvin, her eyes wide with rising sheer terror. Calvin, she gasped, her voice breaking into a high-pitched whine. Calvin, tell me she is lying right now. Tell me we still own the house. Tell me you did not give our retirement money to Preston. Calvin finally looked up at her, his face a mask of absolute defeat. I am sorry, Brenda, he whispered, his voice cracking. I thought it was a sure thing. Preston promised me a massive return on the investment. I was just trying to pay for the wedding you wanted. A guttural, agonizing sob ripped from Brenda's throat. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on her, crushing her lifelong delusions of high society grandeur. She realized that the daughter she had mocked and belittled her entire life was not a struggling data entry clerk. I was a multi-millionaire executive who now held the legal right to throw her out onto the street. You cannot do this, Brenda wept, turning back to me with wild, pleading eyes. Iman, please, you are my daughter. You cannot foreclose on your own parents. Where will we go? What will we tell our friends? We will be completely ruined. The scandal will destroy us. You ruined yourselves, I stated, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. You chose to prioritize the illusion of wealth over your own family. You chose to protect a con artist instead of believing your own daughter. You told me I was socially unfit and bitter. You told me I was a massive disappointment. Well, Brenda, the disappointment just bought your house and I am calling in the debt. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the formal eviction notice printed on the thick, textured letterhead of Apex Financial Solutions. I held it out to my father. You have until noon tomorrow to produce the missed payments and the compounding interest, Calvin. I said, my tone clinical and precise. If the funds are not wired to my corporate account by 12 o'clock sharp, my collections team will officially execute the foreclosure. The county sheriff will arrive at your door on Monday morning. You will have 30 days to vacate the premises before your belongings are forcefully removed and the locks are permanently changed. Calvin took the paper with trembling fingers, his eyes welling with thick tears. He looked like a broken, pathetic old man. He had traded his family legacy for a cheap scam, and he had lost everything. I turned my back on them and walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the elevators. I could hear my mother sobbing uncontrollably behind me, her cries echoing pathetically through the quiet corridor. I did not feel an ounce of guilt or regret. I felt light. I felt powerful. I felt absolutely free. They had tried to bury me my entire life, but they did not realize I was the one holding the shovel. I pressed the glowing downward button for the elevator and watched the digital display numbers slowly descend. My heart beat with a steady, calm rhythm. I fully expected to step into the steel box and leave the luxury hotel behind me forever, but the universe had one final act of absolute destruction planned for my family. Before the elevator doors could slide open, the heavy wooden doors of the bridal parlor flew open once again, crashing violently against the corridor wall. Sierra stormed out into the hallway, her white silk robe billowing behind her like a ghost. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure selfish fury. She was not chasing after me to apologize or beg for mercy. She was running away from the suffocating reality inside that room. Brenda stumbled out right behind her, grabbing wildly at Sierra's arm, trying to pull her back into the parlor. "How could you let him do this to us?" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You were supposed to marry into wealth, Sierra. You were supposed to save this family from financial ruin. How could you be so incredibly stupid to not know the man you were sleeping with was completely broke?" Sierra violently yanked her arm away from our mother. She spun around, her eyes wide and manic, completely unhinged by the intense pressure of her own collapsing lies. "I did know," Mother Sierra screamed at the top of her lungs, completely abandoning any pretense of high society manners. "I knew he was broke for the last 6 months." The entire hallway seemed to instantly freeze. I stood perfectly still by the elevator bank, letting the heavy silence amplify her horrific confession. Calvin appeared in the doorway of the parlor, his face a sickly shade of gray. He was leaning heavily against the wooden frame, using it to support his own weight, as if his bones had suddenly turned to dust. "What did you just say?" Calvin whispered, his voice barely carrying down the long corridor. "You knew Preston was bankrupt. You knew he had no trust fund and no money when I gave him everything we had." Sierra threw her hands up in the air, letting out a loud, bitter laugh that sounded completely insane. "Of course I knew, Dad," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger back toward the room where Preston was hiding like a coward. "I saw his credit card statements months ago. I saw the massive collection notices piling up in his apartment. He confessed everything to me right before you paid the non-refundable venue deposit." Brenda looked like she had been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object. She stumbled back, clutching her chest as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. "Then why did you not tell us?" Brenda gasped, her eyes wide with total horror. "Why did you let your father wire him our entire retirement savings? Why did you let us mortgage the ancestral home if you knew it was all a giant scam?" "Because I deserved this wedding," Sierra shrieked, stomping her bare foot on the plush hotel carpet like a spoiled toddler throwing a massive tantrum. "I deserve the Covington name and everything that comes with it. Do you have any idea how many followers I gained when we announced the engagement to the public? My entire social media presence is completely built on this luxury lifestyle. I have high-end brand deals lined up to sponsor the honeymoon. I have a massive magazine feature coming out next month detailing my elite bridal journey. If I canceled the wedding because my fiancé was a broke fraud, I would be the laughingstock of my entire social circle. I would lose all my sponsorships and my status." The sheer staggering magnitude of her vanity hung in the air like a toxic poison. She had willingly let her parents destroy their entire financial future just so she could post glamorous fake photos on the internet. She had watched her own father sign away the house he had raised us in just to maintain a digital aesthetic built on absolute lies. She did not care about Preston's money, or his lack of it. She only cared about the perception of wealth. "You let us lose everything," Calvin said, his voice trembling violently. "You let me sign that toxic subprime loan knowing Preston was never going to pay us back. You sacrificed our entire life for an Instagram aesthetic. You let your sister buy our home just so you could put on a fake dress and pretend to be a billionaire." "Do not try to play the innocent victim, Dad." Sierra spat back, completely devoid of any guilt or empathy. "You and Mom are exactly the same as me. You only care about how things look to other people." You wanted to brag to your country club friends that your daughter married a Covington. You were practically drooling over the thought of his imaginary family wealth. You wanted to rub it in Iman's face that I was the successful one. I just gave you exactly what you wanted. I gave you the perfect high society wedding. It is not my fault you were stupid enough to bet the house on it. Calvin's eyes widened in absolute horror as he stared at his golden child. The beautiful daughter he had worshipped. The daughter he had sacrificed everything for the daughter. He had constantly elevated above me, was standing right in front of him, admitting she had knowingly orchestrated his total ruin for a few internet likes. She was looking at him with pure disgust, blaming him for falling for the trap she helped set. The realization hit his body like a physical blow. Calvin reached a trembling hand up to his chest, gripping the fabric of his expensive dress shirt. His face turned a terrifying shade of chalky white, and a strange gargling sound escaped his lips. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his eyes darting frantically around the hallway as his heart gave out under the immense weight of the betrayal. Calvin Brenda screamed, her voice piercing the air. My father stumbled forward, his knees buckling instantly beneath him. He crashed hard onto the corridor floor, his shoulder hitting the ornate baseboard with a heavy, sickening thud. He lay there gasping for air, his eyes rolling back in his head as the sheer stress and shock of Sierra's ultimate betrayal triggered a massive medical emergency. He clutched at his chest, writhing on the patterned carpet in pure agony. Brenda dropped to her knees beside him, shrieking for someone to call an ambulance. She grabbed his face, shaking him violently as if she could simply wake him up from the nightmare. Preston finally emerged from the parlor, his face pale, looking down at the chaotic scene with wide, terrified eyes, but making absolutely no move to help. He just stood safely in the doorway, preserving his own skin. Sierra just stood there, staring down at her collapsed father, with a blank, empty expression. She did not kneel down to help him. She did not offer a single word of comfort. She simply crossed her arms over her silk robe, her jaw set in a stubborn, defiant line. She was visibly more annoyed by the dramatic interruption to her wedding day than concerned for her father's life. I watched the entire pathetic scene unfold from the elevator bank. I did not rush forward to help. I did not reach for my phone to call emergency services. They had made their choices. They had built their entire lives on lies, vanity, and superficial status. They had willingly crushed anyone who got in their way, including me. Now the foundation had finally crumbled, and they were all being buried underneath the rubble of their own making. The elevator arrived with a soft, polite ding. The polished steel doors slid smoothly open, revealing the empty, mirrored interior. I stepped inside, adjusting the strap of my leather briefcase on my shoulder. I looked out into the hallway one last time, watching my mother weep over my collapsed father, while my sister stood by, completely unbothered by the absolute destruction she had caused. I reached out and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors began to slide shut, cutting off the sounds of Brenda's hysterical sobbing and the distant wail of sirens. As the elevator descended toward the ground floor, I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. The toxic cycle was finally broken. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my ancestral home. The house of cards had completely fallen, and I was exactly where I belonged. When the elevator doors slid open on the ground floor, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the tragedy unfolding upstairs. The grand lobby of the luxury hotel was buzzing with elite wedding guests dressed in designer gowns and expensive tailored suits. Waiters circulated through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. In the center of the room stood Arthur and Beatrice Covington holding court. Preston's parents were the absolute picture of old money arrogance. They were sipping mimosas and accepting early congratulations, completely unaware that their son's entire fraudulent empire had just been vaporized. I stood near the marble pillars watching them with quiet amusement. I knew the truth about the Covingtons. They had quietly cut Preston off years ago when his gambling debts and shady investments nearly ruined their family name, but they still showed up today to maintain public appearances. They loved the cameras and the high society prestige just as much as my mother did. The elegant illusion shattered exactly 3 minutes later. The heavy glass doors of the hotel burst open as two paramedics rushed in carrying a stretcher and a bright orange medical bag. The string quartet playing in the corner abruptly stopped. The wealthy guests parted like the Red Sea, murmuring in shocked confusion as the medics sprinted toward the elevators. Before the crowd could even fully process the medical emergency, Preston stumbled out of the emergency stairwell. He looked like a cornered rat. His expensive tuxedo jacket was missing, and his silk bow tie hung loosely around his neck. He was clutching his cell phone and sweating profusely. He locked eyes with his father across the crowded lobby. Arthur Covington's smug smile instantly vanished. He recognized the look of absolute panic on his son's face. Arthur grabbed his wife's arm and marched directly toward Preston, pulling him into a secluded alcove near the coat check. I slowly walked closer, letting the marble columns hide my presence so I could hear every single word. "You stupid boy," Arthur hissed, grabbing Preston by the collar of his shirt. "What have you done now? Where is your bride?" Preston was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit. "It is over, Dad," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "Iman's company bought the debt. They know about the offshore accounts. They know the trust fund is completely empty. Sierra just confessed that she knew I was broke the whole time. Her father just had a massive heart attack, and the wedding is off." Beatrice Covington let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her diamond-ringed hand. "You let them find out?" Arthur growled, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "I told you to keep this quiet until the marriage certificate was legally signed. You were supposed to secure her family money to pay off your angry investors. Now we are all going to be dragged into a federal fraud investigation because of your incredible incompetence." Arthur did not hesitate. He did not ask about Calvin's health or Sierra's well-being. He dropped his son's collar and turned immediately to his wife. "We are leaving right now." Arthur commanded, his voice cold and clinical. "We are not going down with this sinking ship. Do not speak to the press, and do not answer any phone calls from these people." Beatrice nodded frantically, pulling her designer shawl tightly around her shoulders. Without another word to their only son, the Covingtons turned their backs and briskly walked out the side exit of the luxury hotel, leaving Preston completely alone to face the consequences of his crimes. As the Covingtons fled into the morning air, the elevator chimed and the paramedics wheeled my father into the lobby. Calvin was strapped to the gurney, an oxygen mask covering his pale face. Brenda ran alongside him, weeping hysterically, her perfect makeup completely destroyed by her tears. Sierra trailed several feet behind them. She had finally put on her lavish couture wedding gown, but it looked ridiculous now. The intricate lace and heavy silk dragged across the marble floor like a depressing costume. She was staring at her phone furiously, typing a message, probably trying to control the narrative for her followers, before the news of the ambulance leaked to the press. Preston saw her and lunged forward, grabbing her arm in a desperate final attempt to salvage his scam. "Sierra, wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "We can still do this. We can still get married today. Think about the brand deals. Think about the magazine feature. We can spin this tragedy into a story of true love overcoming adversity. Our followers will eat it up. We can monetize the drama and build a completely new empire together. Just tell your mother we are going through with the ceremony." Sierra slowly lowered her phone and looked at the man she was supposed to marry. She looked at his sweaty face, his disheveled hair, and the absolute desperation radiating from his trembling body. Then she looked around the lobby, noticing that his wealthy parents were conspicuously absent. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. "Get your filthy hands off me, Preston," she spat forcefully, shoving him away. "You have absolutely nothing to offer me. You are broke. You are a fraud. Your own parents just abandoned you in a hotel lobby. There is no brand without the Covington money. There is no empire. You are just a pathetic loser who cannot even afford to pay his own credit card bills. I would rather be dead than tie my brand to a bankrupt criminal." She turned to the terrified wedding planner who was standing near the front desk, holding a clipboard. "Cancel everything?" Sierra screamed, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceiling. Tell these people to go home. The wedding is completely over. The wealthy guests began to immediately scatter, grabbing their coats and rushing out the front doors, desperate to distance themselves from the scandalous spectacle. The murmurs of shock turned into hurried whispers as the elite crowd abandoned the sinking ship just as quickly as the Covingtons had. Preston stood alone in the center of the empty lobby, his head hanging in total defeat. His last chance at avoiding federal prison had just walked out the door. Sierra marched out the front entrance, gathering her heavy wedding dress in her arms, leaving her fake fiancé and her ruined family behind so she could focus on her social media damage control. I watched the entire extravagant production dissolve into absolute nothingness. The fake prestige, the forced superiority, and the desperate grasping for status were all gone. I adjusted the strap of my briefcase, took a deep breath of the quiet hotel air, and walked out into the bright morning sunlight, ready to begin my new life. I arrived at the sleek glass building of Apex Financial Solutions early on Monday morning. The weekend had passed in a blur of quiet satisfaction and strategic planning. The chaotic spectacle of the canceled wedding was already fading into a distant memory. I walked through the gleaming marble lobby, feeling the familiar hum of corporate power all around me. When I stepped out of the private elevator onto the top executive floor, my assistant immediately approached me. She told me I had two unexpected visitors waiting in the main conference room. I knew exactly who it was. I walked down the long corridor, feeling the soft, thick carpet beneath my expensive shoes. I opened the heavy frosted glass door and saw my parents sitting at the far end of the massive mahogany table. They looked like completely different people. The arrogant posture and designer superiority were entirely gone. They looked incredibly small against the panoramic views of the city skyline behind them. Calvin was wearing a wrinkled suit that looked like he had slept in it for 3 days straight. Brenda had dark, exhausted circles under her eyes, and her usually perfect hair was flat and lifeless. They looked completely stripped of their false pride. When I walked into the room, they both stood up immediately. Their eyes were wide with a desperate, pleading look that I had never seen from them before. "Iman, please," my mother said, her voice trembling and weak. "Please sit down and talk to us. We have nowhere else to go." I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the table, opening my leather briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of official legal documents. I placed them firmly on the polished wood surface. "You are wasting your time, Brenda," I said, my voice completely level and cold. "The deadline expired at noon yesterday. The foreclosure is finalized and recorded with the county. The property now legally belongs to my company." Calvin took a desperate step forward, his hands shaking as he reached out toward me. "Iman, you cannot do this to us," he begged, his voice cracking under the immense strain. "We are your family. We are your parents who raised you. We made a terrible mistake trusting Preston, but you cannot throw us out on the street like garbage. We will pay you back every single cent. I will get a new job today. I will work for the rest of my life to repay the loan and the interest. Just please do not take our home away from us. It is the only thing we have left in this world." I looked at the man who had spent my entire childhood making me feel like a heavy, unwanted burden. I looked at the woman who had used me as a constant scapegoat to elevate her precious golden child. I felt absolutely no pity for either of them. "You do not have a home, Calvin," I said, staring directly into his bloodshot eyes. "You traded your home for a chance to brag to your country club friends about a fake billionaire son-in-law. You risked everything you owned to buy a luxury wedding for a daughter who openly despises you both. You gambled your entire life on a cheap scam, and now you expect me to save you from your own pathetic choices." Brenda started to cry, thick, ugly tears rolling down her pale cheeks. "We were wrong, Iman," she sobbed, hiding her face in her trembling hands. "We were so wrong about everything. We should have listened to you when you tried to warn us. We should have treated you better all these years. Please give us another chance to prove we can be a real family." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed sharply off the glass walls of the conference room. "A real family, Brenda?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "When were we ever a real family? Was it when I was 12 years old and you forgot to pick me up from the hospital because you were too busy buying Sierra a pageantry dress? Was it when I earned a full academic scholarship and Calvin refused to attend the award ceremony because he was busy putting a down payment on Sierra's sports car? Was it when you forced me to pay rent the very week I turned 18 while you handed my sister a limitless credit card? You spent decades telling all your wealthy friends that I was just a lowly office worker because you were deeply ashamed of my independence. The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of my mother's pathetic weeping. I paced slowly around the conference table, letting my words sink into their minds. You never loved me. I continued, my voice rising with years of suppressed righteous anger. You only loved the fake image of yourselves. You wanted a perfect little high society family, and I did not fit your ridiculous mold. I worked 3 exhausting jobs in college to pay my own tuition, while Sierra blew her trust fund on designer clothes and luxury vacations. I built a massive corporate empire from absolute nothing while you sat in your mortgaged mansion mocking my clothes and my lifestyle. You called me a disappointment to my face. You called me socially unfit and awkward. You told me I would die alone and miserable because I cared about building a career instead of hunting for a rich husband. You used every single opportunity to tear me down so you could feel vastly superior. And the truly hilarious part is that I am the only one who actually achieved the massive wealth you so desperately craved. Calvin sank back down into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He looked completely shattered. We did not know, he whispered into his palms. We had no idea you were so incredibly successful. If we had known, we would have asked you for help instead of trusting Preston. That is exactly my point, Calvin, I said, stopping right next to his chair. You only value human beings based on their bank accounts. If you had known I was wealthy, you would have tried to use me just like you tried to use the Covingtons. You would have drained me dry to fund Sierra's delusions. But you do not get to use me ever again. The long era of you treating me like garbage is officially over. I picked up the stack of papers from the table and shoved them directly into my father's trembling hands. This is your formal 30-day notice of eviction, I stated clinically. You have exactly 1 month to pack your miserable lives into boxes and vacate my property. If you leave so much as a single piece of trash behind, I will charge you exorbitant disposal fees. If you attempt to damage the property on your way out, I will press criminal charges and bury you in aggressive litigation for the rest of your natural lives. Brenda looked up at me, her eyes filled with absolute terror and defeat. Where are we supposed to go, Iman? She cried out, her voice shrill and panicked. We have absolutely no money left. We have no credit. Our friends will not even speak to us after the wedding debacle yesterday. We will be living on the street. I looked down at her, feeling nothing but a profound sense of absolute closure. You should try calling your perfect daughter Sierra, I suggested, my voice dripping with cold sarcasm. Maybe she can let you sleep on the floor of her tiny apartment. Or better yet, maybe she can make a desperate internet post asking her followers to donate to your pathetic cause. But you are not my problem anymore. I walked over to the conference room door and opened it wide. The corporate security guards are waiting in the main lobby, I said, gesturing toward the hallway. You have exactly 2 minutes to leave my building before I have you physically removed for trespassing. Calvin slowly stood up, clutching the thick eviction notice to his chest like a fragile shield. He looked at me one last time, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of the brilliant daughter he had thrown away. He did not say another word. He just took his sobbing wife by the arm and guided her slowly out of the room. I watched them walk down the long corporate corridor, their heads bowed in total permanent disgrace. They were no longer my parents. They were just 2 bankrupt strangers being escorted out of my building. I closed the heavy glass door behind them and walked back to my desk, fully ready to enjoy the rest of my beautiful life. I sat down at my expansive glass desk and let the absolute silence of my office wash over me. The view of the city skyline stretched out in front of me, entirely bathed in the warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun. I had spent my entire life working toward this exact moment. I had clawed my way up from the bottom, building an empire brick by brick, while my family laughed at my ambitions. Now I was sitting at the pinnacle of my success, and the people who had tried to bury me were finally gone. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the quarterly projections for my firm. For the first 2 hours, my mind was completely clear and focused. Then my personal cell phone began to vibrate on the edge of my desk. It buzzed once, then twice, then it settled into a continuous, relentless vibration that rattled against the glass surface. I did not reach for it immediately. I simply watched the screen light up over and over again. The notifications poured in like a digital avalanche. It was exactly what I had expected would happen once the reality of their situation fully set in. My parents had 30 days to vacate, but Sierra was dealing with an immediate catastrophic collapse. I slowly reached out and picked up the phone, swiping the screen to unlock it. The numbers glaring back at me were staggering. There were exactly 135 missed calls. There were 44 new voicemails. Almost all of them were from my sister. A few were from unfamiliar numbers, likely reporters or collection agencies trying to track down anyone associated with the Covington name. I sat back in my plush leather chair and tapped the screen to play the first voicemail. "Iman, please pick up the phone," Sierra sobbed through the tiny speaker. Her voice was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant high society sneer was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic gasping of a terrified child. "You have to help me, Iman. Preston is gone. He just left me here at the hotel, and the management is threatening to call the police because his credit cards all declined. I have absolutely no money to pay for the bridal suite. They are holding my luggage hostage until the bill is settled. Please, Iman, you have to send a wire transfer right now. I am begging you." I listened to her desperate pleas with absolute clinical detachment. I tapped the screen and moved to the next message. The timeline of her destruction unfolded in chronological order through her hysterical voicemails. "Iman, why are you not answering?" Sierra cried in the 7th voicemail. Her voice was shrill and panicked. "The federal agents are here. They raided Preston's apartment downtown. He was running a massive Ponzi scheme, Iman. They said he defrauded dozens of wealthy investors and moved the money into fake offshore accounts that do not even exist. They are looking for him everywhere, and they keep questioning me. They think I knew about it. They think I am an accomplice because I signed some papers he gave me last month. You have to get me a lawyer. You are the only one with any real money. Mom and Dad are completely useless. They are just crying in the car and ignoring my calls. You have to save me." I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sheer magnitude of her stupidity wash over me. She had been so blinded by the illusion of wealth that she had willingly signed legal documents for a known con artist. She had tied her entire identity and legal liability to a criminal just for the sake of an internet aesthetic. I skipped ahead, playing the 23rd voicemail. "Iman, I am sitting on the curb outside a coffee shop." Sierra wept, her voice completely broken. "My phone battery is dying. My friends will not answer my texts. Every single person from the bridal party has blocked my number. The news is already all over social media. People are making videos laughing at me. They are calling me a fake and a scammer. I have nowhere to go, Iman. Mom said you bought the house and evicted them. I do not understand how you could be so evil. But I have no one else. Please just let me sleep on your couch. I will do anything. I will clean your apartment. I will apologize for everything I ever did to you. Just please come pick me up. I am so scared and cold." I stared at the phone in my hand. I thought about the little girl who used to steal my clothes and cut them to pieces just to watch me cry. I thought about the teenager who laughed when my father told me I was too socially unfit to attend family dinners. I thought about the adult woman who knowingly let her parents sign away their financial future just to fund her fake luxury wedding. She was not sorry for anything she had done to me. She was only sorry that she had finally been caught. She was only apologizing because she had exhausted every single other option and I was the last available resource to drain. If I let her into my home, she would instantly revert to her toxic behavior the moment she felt secure again. She would start demanding money and making excuses. she would try to drag me down into the miserable pit she had dug for herself. My father and mother had spent decades protecting her from the consequences of her own actions, and it had turned her into a monster. I was not going to continue their pathetic legacy. I was not going to be her savior. I tapped the screen and played the very last voicemail. Iman, this is Mom. Brenda whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion and defeat. Sierra is at the police station answering questions about Preston's accounts. Your father and I are sleeping in his car in a parking lot. We have absolutely nothing left. Please, Iman. We are your blood. Please call us back. I let the message play to the end. The automated digital voice announced that there were no more new messages. The silence returned to my office, wrapping around me like a warm, protective blanket. I looked at the screen, watching the red notification badge displaying the 135 missed calls. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel an urge to reach out and fix their broken lives. They had actively chosen this path every single day for the past 30 years. They had worshipped the illusion of money and discarded the only daughter who truly loved them. Now they had neither. I raised my finger and pressed the delete button. I watched as the 44 sobbing voicemails vanished completely from my phone. I cleared the missed call notifications, erasing every digital trace of my former family. I placed the phone face down on the glass desk and turned my chair toward the massive window. The sun was finally beginning to set, casting brilliant shades of purple and gold across the city below. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the crystal carafe on my credenza. I took a slow, deliberate sip, enjoying the crisp, cool taste. My life was finally my own, and for the first time in 34 years, I was completely free. 6 months passed since that morning in the conference room. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office at Apex Financial Solutions, watching the early spring sunlight wash over the bustling city below. I held a warm ceramic mug of dark roast coffee between my hands, letting the comforting heat seep into my palms. The frantic ringing of my personal cell phone was a thing of the distant past. I had changed my number the very next day, cutting the final invisible cord that tied me to the sinking ship of my biological family. I took a slow sip of the rich coffee, enjoying the profound, absolute quiet of my new reality. The transition had been remarkably smooth. Preston Covington had been indicted on multiple federal charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. His trial was currently dominating the local news cycle, and his wealthy parents had completely fled to a remote island estate in Europe to escape the relentless media scrutiny. Sierra had tried to reinvent her social media brand as the tragic victim of a cruel con artist, but the internet is highly unforgiving. Someone had leaked the hotel lobby security footage showing her horrific meltdown, and her subscriber count absolutely plummeted. She was currently working as a shift manager at a mid-tier cosmetics store, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of a luxury lifestyle on a minimum wage salary. Calvin and Brenda had quietly vacated the ancestral home on the 29th day of their eviction notice. They left the property in pristine condition, terrified by my threat of aggressive litigation. They had moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in an unremarkable suburb, far away from the elite country clubs and the high society luncheons they used to rule. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Calvin had taken a job selling insurance, while Brenda spent her days watching daytime television, mourning the loss of her precious social status. They had built their entire identities on the perception of wealth, and without it they were just hollow, empty shells. I did not sell the house. When the deed officially transferred into my corporate portfolio, my board of directors advised me to liquidate the massive property and add the millions to our quarterly profit margins. It would have been the standard clinical business decision, but that house represented decades of suffocating oppression. It was a monument to fake prestige and toxic familial abuse. I wanted to cleanse the property of its dark history. I wanted to take the very place where I had been constantly told I was worthless and transform it into an engine of absolute empowerment. I completely gutted the interior of the mansion. I ordered the contractors to rip out the heavy velvet drapes, the oppressive dark wood paneling, and the gaudy crystal chandeliers that my mother had prized above her own children. We tore down the walls of the formal dining room, where I had endured countless dinners, being called a disappointment. We replaced the suffocating old money aesthetic with bright open concept workspaces, floor-to-ceiling glass partitions, and state-of-the-art technology. I turned my childhood prison into the Vanguard Innovation Center. It was a fully subsidized corporate incubator hub specifically designed for Black women entrepreneurs. I wanted to provide the exact kind of unwavering support and vital financial backing that I had been ruthlessly denied. I wanted to create a sanctuary where brilliant minds could thrive without having to fight through the endless barriers of systemic doubt and family sabotage. I walked back to my desk and tapped the screen of my tablet, pulling up the live security feed from the incubator. The high-definition cameras showed the completely transformed main floor of the old estate. Where Calvin used to sit in his leather armchair drinking expensive scotch and mocking my career aspirations, there was now a bustling collaborative workspace. I watched a group of brilliant young women huddled around a smartboard passionately discussing their startup projections. In the room that used to be Sierra's lavish bedroom, a woman was pitching her software development company to a panel of venture capitalists I had personally flown in. The house was finally alive. It was no longer a silent mausoleum of secrets and debt. It was filled with the vibrant, energetic hum of real ambition and authentic success. These women were not faking their wealth for internet followers or desperate social climbing. They were building tangible, lasting empires with their own brilliant minds. Every single time a new business launched out of the Vanguard Center, it completely erased another terrible memory from my past. The legacy of that property was no longer tied to Calvin and Brenda's delusions. It was tied to generational wealth and intellectual triumph. My assistant knocked softly on the frosted glass of my office door before stepping inside. She was holding a thick silver-embossed envelope. She walked over and handed it to me with a bright professional smile. It was an exclusive invitation to headline the keynote address at the National Women in Finance Summit next month. The board of directors had specifically requested me to share the story of how I built Apex Financial Solutions from the ground up without a single dime of family support. I set the invitation down on my immaculate glass desk next to my coffee mug. A deep, genuine smile spread across my face. I thought about the scared little girl who used to hide in the library to escape her mother's vicious insults. I thought about the exhausted college student working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, while her parents funded her sister's lavish lifestyle. That girl had fought through every single obstacle they threw in front of her, and she had emerged entirely unbreakable. I picked up my coffee and walked back to the window, looking out over the sprawling city that I had conquered entirely on my own terms. The air in my office felt incredibly light. There was no more anxiety, no more heavy burdens of expectation, and absolutely no more toxic family members dragging me down. I had completely rewritten my own destiny. I took another long sip of my coffee, watching the morning traffic flow far below. My new empire was thriving, and my beautiful life was just beginning. The ultimate lesson here is that true security and self-worth must come from within, rather than from the conditional approval of a toxic family. When you finally stop pouring your energy into a bottomless well of ungrateful relatives, you free yourself to build an authentic legacy. Walking away from those who constantly drag you down allows you to create a beautiful space where you and others who truly deserve support can thrive. Share your own experience of breaking free from toxic family dynamics in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more inspiring stories of personal triumph.